Hi guys, tonight we begin in a place that feels both distant and strangely familiar, where the air is cool and still and the ground beneath your feet holds stories older than most civilizations you can name. You find yourself standing on a quiet stretch of land beneath a wide star-filled sky. The horizon glows faintly with the last traces of sunset fading into deep blue. Somewhere nearby, a small fire crackles softly, its warmth barely pushing back the night air. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always calming to imagine these stories drifting across the world, reaching people in different, quiet rooms at different hours of the night. Now dim the lights and let yourself settle into this moment. Because the story you are about to walk through does not begin with modern politics or tension, but with something much slower, much older. It begins with land, with people, and with the quiet formation of identity. You stand on what will one day be called Persia, though for now no such name exists. The land stretches out in gentle hills and open plains dotted with small settlements. The air carries the faint scent of dry grass and distant wood smoke. There is no empire yet, no borders drawn across maps, no global attention focused here, only scattered groups of people living close to the rhythms of nature. At this time, somewhere around the early 1st millennium BCE, the region is home to various Indo-Iranian tribes. These groups move with the seasons, tending animals, cultivating small plots of land, and slowly building communities that are both resilient and deeply connected to their environment. You can almost hear the soft sounds of daily life, the low murmur of conversation, the rustling of wool garments, the occasional call of animals in the distance. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that these early Iranian peoples, grated into this region from areas further north, bringing with them languages and cultural practices that would eventually form the foundation of Persian identity. Yet researchers continue to question the exact paths and timelines of these migrations. Some suggest gradual movement over centuries, while others argue for more sudden shifts driven by climate or conflict. As you walk slowly across the landscape, you notice how practical everything feels. Homes are built from simple materials, mud, brick, wood, and whatever can be gathered nearby. There is no grand architecture yet, no towering palaces, but there is something else, a sense of quiet organization. Even at this early stage, people are beginning to form social structures, roles within the community, and shared traditions that guide daily life. You step closer to a small gathering near the fire. The glow illuminates faces that are calm-focused. Someone stirs a pot, the scent of cooked grains rising into the air. Another person carefully tends to a piece of cloth, weaving it with slow, practiced movements. It is a scene of patience, of continuity, and you might find yourself wondering, how do these quiet moments eventually lead to something as vast as an empire? The answer is not sudden, it unfolds slowly, almost invisibly at first. One lesser-known detail about these early societies is their deep connection to oral tradition. Stories, beliefs, and histories are not written down, but carried through, memory passed from one generation to the next. Around these fires under skies like this one, people share tales that shape how they understand the world. Some of these stories will eventually influence religious ideas, including the early roots of what becomes Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest known religions. Scholars remain divided on exactly when these spiritual beliefs began to take recognizable form. Some suggest that key elements emerged quite early among these tribes, while others believe the formalization came later as societies became more structured. As you continue walking, the ground beneath your feet feels cool, slightly uneven. There is a quiet stillness in the air, broken only by natural sounds, the wind moving gently across the plains, the distant cry of an animal, the soft crackle of fire behind you. It is the kind of environment that encourages reflection, that allows ideas to take root slowly. And in many ways, that's exactly what is happening here, because long before Persia becomes known for its kings and armies, it is a place where ideas are forming. Ideas about leadership, about order, about how different groups of people might live together. These ideas will not remain small forever. You glance up at the sky. The stars seem endless, scattered across the darkness in quiet patterns. It is the same sky that countless generations before you have looked upon, and the same sky that will watch over the rise and fall of empires. There is something calming about that continuity. Today we often think of history in terms of major events, battles, revolutions, political decisions. But standing here, you realize that history begins in much quieter ways, in shared meals, in small communities, in stories told softly by firelight. And perhaps in the stillness of this night, you can feel the very beginning of something that will one day stretch far beyond this landscape. The tension between modern nations, the relationships between countries like the United States and Israel, all of it traces back in some distant way to these early moments. Not directly, not in a straight line, but through layers of identity, memory, and transformation. It's almost like watching the first ripple on the surface of water, knowing that it will spread outward, touching shores you cannot yet see. You take a slow breath, the air cool and steady, and begin to move forward again deeper into this land that is not yet Persia, but is quietly becoming something more. You continue walking across the quiet land, the soft crunch of dry earth beneath your feet, blending with the distant sounds of night. The fire you left behind is now only a faint glow on the horizon, and ahead of you the landscape opens wider. Low hills roll gently into the distance, and a thin breeze carries with it the scent of dust and wild grasses. It is a calm, steady world, one that does not yet seem aware of how important it will become. Before this place is ever called Persia, it is part of a much larger cultural region often referred to by historians as the Iranian Plateau. This vast area stretches across mountains, deserts, and fertile valleys, creating a landscape that shapes the people who live here. Life is not easy, but it is balanced. Summers can be harsh and dry, winters cold and biting, and so communities learn to adapt carefully, conserving resources and working closely together. You notice a small group of travellers moving slowly along a faint path. They carry simple belongings wrapped in cloth and tied with rope. Their pace is unhurried, almost rhythmic, as if guided by the land itself. These are not wandering without purpose. Many early Iranian tribes practiced a semi-nomadic lifestyle, moving with their herds and seasons, settling temporarily where the land allowed. A commonly accepted historical fact is that these early groups spoke languages belonging to the Indo-European family, the same broad language group that includes many modern European and South Asian languages. It is a quiet reminder of how deeply connected human history can be, even across great distances. Yet some historians suggest that the cultural identity of these early Iranian peoples was shaped just as much by the land as by language. Others argue that migration patterns played a more decisive role. The exact balance between environment and movement is still something researchers continue to question, and perhaps always will. As you walk closer, you notice how carefully these travellers observe their surroundings. One pauses, kneeling to touch the soil, testing its dryness. Another looks toward the horizon, reading subtle changes in light and shadow. Survival here depends on attention. Small details matter. There is a simplicity to their clothing. Wool garments layered for warmth, tied with belts or simple cords. The texture looks coarse but practical. You can almost feel it slightly rough against the skin, yet comforting in the cold air. Footwear is sturdy, made for walking long distances over uneven ground. And you might find yourself thinking about how different this is from modern life, where movement is often fast and effortless. Today we travel across countries in hours. Here every journey is measured in days, sometimes weeks, and each step carries weight. You continue along the path and gradually the land begins to change. The hills rise slightly higher, and in the distance you can see the faint outline of mountains. These mountains will later become an important natural boundary, shaping trade routes and political divisions. For now, they simply stand quietly, part of the rhythm of the landscape. A lesser-known detail about these early communities is their early use of domesticated animals, not just for food, but for mobility and communication. Horses in particular begin to play a more central role over time. While not yet as prominent as they will become in later Persian military culture, their presence is already being felt. Some scholars believe that the mastery of horse riding among Iranian peoples contributed significantly to their later influence across the region. Others caution that this development was gradual and shared among many neighbouring cultures. As with much of early history, the story is not entirely clear. You notice a cluster of tents ahead, arranged in a loose circle. Smoke rises gently from a central fire, drifting upward into the darkening sky. The scene feels familiar yet distant. Children move quietly between the tents, their laughter soft, almost blending into the wind. An older figure sits near the fire, speaking slowly, perhaps telling a story or giving guidance. There is a sense of continuity here. Knowledge is passed down not through books but through presence, through watching, listening, repeating. You can almost hear the cadence of spoken language, steady and deliberate, shaped by generations before. As you stand at the edge of this small settlement, you realize that identity here is not fixed. It is fluid, evolving. These people do not yet think of themselves as part of a single nation or empire. Their loyalty is to family, to tribe, to shared customs. The idea of a unified Persia has not yet taken form, and yet something is slowly building. The geography of this land, with its mix of isolation and connection, encourages both independence and interaction. Tribes remain distinct, but they are not entirely separate. Trade, intermarriage, and occasional conflict bring them into contact with one another. Over time, these interactions begin to create shared patterns. You take a moment to look around more carefully. The firelight flickers against the fabric of the tents, casting soft shadows that move with the wind. The air feels cooler now, and you pull your clothing closer around you, imagining how people here would rely on layers of wool and animal skins to stay warm through the night. There is a quiet beauty in this simplicity, and perhaps this is where it begins to make sense. Not as a sudden rise of power, but as a slow weaving together of people, land and ideas, each small community contributing something, each generation adding another layer. You step away from the settlement, continuing your journey forward. The path is faint, but you follow it instinctively, as if guided by something deeper than sight. Above you, the stars remain steady, unchanged. They have seen countless nights like this, and will see many more. Beneath them, the people of this land continue their lives unaware that they are laying the foundation for something that will one day stretch across continents. And as you walk, you begin to sense that the next step in this journey will not just be about survival, but about organization, leadership, and vision. Something is beginning to take shape quietly, patiently in the distance. You move forward into the early light of morning, the sky shifting from deep blue to soft gold. The air feels cooler now, touched by the quiet stillness that comes just before the world fully wakes. In the distance, the land begins to feel more settled. Paths are clearer gatherings, more permanent, and there is a subtle sense that something new is beginning to take form. The scattered tribes you have been walking among are slowly changing. Over time, some groups begin to settle more permanently, forming stronger centres of activity. These are not yet cities in the grand sense, but they are becoming places of coordination. You can see it in the way structures are built closer together, in the way people move with shared purpose, in the way decisions seem to carry beyond a single family. This is the world into which a figure quietly emerges, someone whose influence will ripple far beyond his lifetime. His name is Cyrus, later known as Cyrus the Great. You do not meet him directly, at least not in the way we might imagine today. Instead, you begin to notice the effects of his presence. A sense of direction, of cohesion, of something larger than individual tribes. Around the mid-6th century BC, Cyrus begins uniting the Persian tribes, gradually forming what will become the Achaemenid Empire. A widely recognized historical fact is that Cyrus the Great successfully overthrew the Median Empire and established a new political structure that incorporated diverse peoples under a single rule. But as you move through this landscape, it does not feel like a sudden conquest. It feels more like a gathering, a drawing together of separate threads into a single, more stable fabric. You walk through a growing settlement where activity has a new rhythm. Workers shape mud bricks more precisely. Storage areas appear more organized. There is an emerging sense of planning, as though someone has begun thinking not just about survival, but about continuity. And you might wonder how one person can influence something so vast. The answer in part lies in leadership style. Unlike many rulers who come later, Cyrus is often remembered for a more measured approach to power. Some historians suggest that he allowed conquered peoples to maintain their customs and beliefs, creating a system that felt less like domination and more like structured coexistence. Others argue that this image may be somewhat idealized, shaped by later records and interpretations. One of the most intriguing deals tied to Cyrus is the artifact often referred to as the Cyrus cylinder. This clay object contains inscriptions that some interpret as an early declaration of human rights, particularly in how it describes the treatment of conquered peoples. However, scholars remain divided on how modern this interpretation truly is. Some view it as a political document reflecting standard practices of the time rather than a uniquely progressive statement. As you continue walking, you notice how communication begins to change. Messengers move with purpose between settlements, carrying information, decisions, instructions. There is a growing network, still simple but expanding. It feels like watching the early formation of something that will eventually become far more complex. The land itself seems to respond. Fields are more carefully tended. Water sources are managed with greater attention. Even the paths you follow appear more deliberate, as though shaped by a repeated use and shared understanding. You pass a group of individuals gathered around a central figure. Their posture suggests respect but not fear. The atmosphere is calm, attentive. It is possible that you are witnessing a local leader, someone aligned with the larger authority that is beginning to take shape across the region. There is a quiet shift happening here. Identity, once centered on small tribes, is slowly expanding. People are beginning to see themselves as part of something broader, something that stretches beyond immediate family and land. This shift is subtle, almost invisible, but it is powerful. A lesser-known aspect of this period is how administrative practices begin to form alongside expansion. Early systems of governance emerge, including the division of territories and the delegation of authority. These systems are not yet fully developed, but they lay the groundwork for what will later become one of the most sophisticated administrative structures of the ancient world. You pause for a moment, taking in the surroundings. The light has grown warmer, now casting long shadows across the ground. The air carries a mix of scents, earth smoke, and something faintly sweet from nearby vegetation. It is a sensory reminder that while political structures are evolving, daily life continues in familiar rhythms. Children still play near the edges of settlements. People still gather around fires. Meals are still prepared slowly with care. The rise of an empire does not erase these moments. It builds around them. And perhaps that is what makes this transformation feel so steady. It is not driven by chaos, but by gradual alignment. By the idea that different groups with different customs can exist within a shared structure. Whether this balance is sustainable is something history will continue to explore. You begin to walk again, following a path that feels more defined than before. It leads outward, connecting one place to another. You can sense that these connections will grow stronger, more intricate, eventually linking vast regions together. Above you, the sky is now bright, the stars long faded, but their presence still lingers in memory. Just as the past lingers in the present, shaping what comes next. And as you move forward, you begin to feel that this is only the beginning of something much larger. The foundations of an empire are being laid, not through sudden force, but through quiet organization, thoughtful leadership, and the steady weaving together of people and place. You continue along the path, and before long, it becomes clearer, more worn, more intentional. The ground feels firmer beneath your feet, as if countless others have passed this way before you. The landscape begins to shift from scattered settlements into something more connected. There is a quiet sense that distance itself is being reduced, not physically, but through effort and design. This is the beginning of something remarkable. As the Achaemenid Empire expands under leaders who follow Cyrus the Great, the need for coordination grows. Managing vast lands requires more than authority. It requires communication. It requires movement. It requires a way to link distant regions without losing control of them. And so you find yourself stepping onto what will later be known as the Royal Road. At first, it does not appear grand. It is simply a well-maintained path, wider than others cleared of obstacles marked in subtle ways. But as you walk further, you begin to notice the pattern. Stations appear at intervals, small outposts where travellers can rest, exchange news, or prepare for the next stretch of their journey. Many sources indicate that this road eventually stretches over 2,500 kilometres, connecting key parts of the empire from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east. It is not just a road, but a system, a network designed to carry messages quickly across vast distances. You pause near one of the stations. A rider arrives, dust rising behind him, his horse breathing steadily from the journey. Without much delay, another rider prepares to take his place, receiving a message and setting off almost immediately. The exchange is smooth, practiced, efficient. You might notice how quiet the process is. There is no shouting, no chaos, just movement, precise and continuous. And you might begin to understand how something like this changes everything. Before, systems like this distance creates isolation. News travels slowly, decisions take time and regions can drift apart, but here distance begins to lose some of its power. Information moves faster. Authority feels closer even when it is far away. A commonly accepted understanding is that this relay system allowed messages to travel at remarkable speeds for the time. Some estimates suggest that royal messages could cross the empire in a matter of days rather than weeks. It is an early glimpse of what we might now think of as infrastructure, something so basic that it often goes unnoticed yet so important that everything depends on it. You continue walking and the road feels different from the natural paths you followed earlier. It is more deliberate. In some areas, stones have been placed to stabilize the ground. In others, the path has been carefully cleared to avoid difficult terrain. It reflects planning intention and long-term thinking. A detail that rarely receives much attention is how these roads were not only used for official communication, but also by traders, travellers, and ordinary people. Over time, they become channels of cultural exchange. Ideas, languages, goods, and customs move along these routes, quietly shaping the empire from within. There is ongoing disagreement over how centralized the control of these routes truly was. Some researchers suggest that the Persian administration maintained strict oversight, ensuring security and efficiency. Others believe that local regions had more autonomy in maintaining and using these roads, adapting them to their own needs. As you move along, you pass a group of merchants travelling with pack animals. Their goods are carefully wrapped, protected from dust and weather. You catch glimpses of textiles, small crafted objects, perhaps even spices. Their journey is long, but the road makes it possible. You can almost imagine how in modern terms this would feel like the early stages of a global network. Today we rely on instant communication messages crossing the world in seconds. But here in this quieter time, this road is doing something similar, just at a slower, more human pace. The sun rises higher now, warming the air. The coolness of the early morning fades, replaced by a gentle heat that settles across the land. You adjust your pace, feeling the rhythm of walking align with the rhythm of the road itself. In the distance, you see a larger settlement, perhaps even an administrative centre. The buildings are more structured, arranged with purpose. There is a sense that decisions are made here, that information arrives and departs, that this place is part of a much larger system. You step off the main road for a moment, standing at its edge. Dust drifts lightly in the air, catching the sunlight. The sound of hooves, voices, and movement continues steadily, never overwhelming but constant. If you'd all notice amazing. Almost soothing. And you begin to realize that this is how empires sustain themselves, not just through power, but through connection, through the ability to maintain relationships across distance to ensure that even the farthest regions remain linked to the center. This quiet network of roads and messengers may not seem as dramatic as battles or conquests, but it is just as important, perhaps even more so. You step back onto the path and continue forward, following the gentle curve of the road as it stretches into the horizon. There is a sense now that the world you're walking through is becoming more organized, more interconnected. The scattered pieces you saw earlier are being drawn together, slowly forming something cohesive. And as you move onward, you begin to sense that this growing structure will soon face its first real tests, not from within, but from beyond its borders. You remain on the road for a while, letting its steady rhythm guide your steps until gradually the surroundings begin to change again. The path widens near a larger settlement, and the air carries a different feeling here, less transient, more grounded. Buildings rise with greater care, their walls straighter, their spaces more defined. There is movement, but it is organized, almost measured. You step into this place quietly, noticing how people from different backgrounds seem to gather here. Their clothing varies slightly. Their languages carry different tones, and yet they share the same space without tension. It feels deliberate, as though someone has made a quiet decision that difference does not have to lead to conflict. As the Achaemenid Empire continues to expand beyond its early core, it begins to encompass a remarkable variety of people, languages, and traditions. Regions that once stood apart are now connected under a single political structure. This could easily create instability, and yet something about the way this empire is managed allows it to hold together. Many accounts describe how Persian rulers, beginning with Cyrus the Great and continuing under his successors like Darius I, adopted a relatively flexible approach to governance. Rather than forcing uniform customs across all regions, they often allowed local traditions, religions, and systems of daily life to continue. You walk through a courtyard where people gather near a small shrine. The design is unfamiliar, not Persian in origin yet. It is treated with quiet respect. Nearby officials observe without interference. It is a subtle but powerful detail. You might begin to sense how unusual this is for the time. In many early empires, control is maintained through strict uniformity, through the imposition of a single culture or belief system. Here the approach feels different. It is less about erasing differences and more about managing them. A widely accepted view is that this policy of relative tolerance helped stabilize the empire, allowing diverse populations to feel less resistance to Persian rule. It reduced the likelihood of constant rebellion, creating a more sustainable system of governance across vast territories. And yet not everyone interprets this in the same way. Some researchers suggest that this tolerance was less about idealism and more about practicality. Allowing local customs to continue made administration easier and reduced the cost of enforcement. Others propose that there may have been genuine philosophical influences at play, possibly linked to early religious ideas emphasizing order and balance. As you move deeper into the settlement, you notice the presence of administrative officials. Their clothing is more structured, their posture attentive. They carry tablets or documents recording information, organizing resources, maintaining order. It is another layer of the system you have been slowly witnessing. An often overlooked aspect of this empire is its use of satrapies, regional divisions governed by appointed officials known as satraps. These individuals act as intermediaries between the central authority and local populations managing taxation, law, and infrastructure. It is a way of extending control without needing direct oversight of every detail. There is still ongoing discussion about how much independence these satraps truly had. Some scholars argue that they operated with significant autonomy, adapting policies to local conditions. Others believe that the central authority maintained tighter control than it might appear, using networks of communication and inspection to ensure loyalty. You pass by a small administrative building, its entrance shaded from the sun. Inside, voices speak quietly, discussing matters that affect regions far beyond this single place. It is a reminder that decisions made here ripple outward, influencing lives across the empire. The air feels warmer, now the sun high above, casting strong light across the stone and earth. You can feel the heat settle on your skin, softened slightly by the occasional breeze that moves through the streets. Nearby, a group of artisans works carefully on decorative elements, perhaps for a larger structure. Their hands move with precision, shaping patterns that carry meaning, patterns that reflect both local traditions and broader influences. You pause to watch, noticing how even in something as simple as decoration, there is a blending of cultures, styles overlap, you evolve, it is not a uniform identity but a layered one, and you might reflect on how this echoes into the present. Today, discussions about identity, culture, and coexistence remain complex. The idea of managing diversity within a single system continues to challenge societies around the world. In some ways, the questions faced here thousands of years ago are not entirely different from those we still ask today. You step back from the busy centre of the settlement and find a quieter space along its edge. The sounds soften, the movement slows. You can still hear the distant activity, but it feels more like a gentle hum now, part of the background rather than the focus. There is a calmness in knowing that this system for now is working, that different peoples can share space, contribute to a larger whole, and maintain a sense of their own identity at the same time. But you also sense that such balance requires constant effort. It is not something that simply exists. It must be maintained, adjusted, protected. You take a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the day and the quiet stability of this place. And as you begin to move forward again, leaving behind the ordered calm of the settlement, you can sense that beyond these borders, other worlds are watching. Other cultures with their own ideas, their own ambitions. Soon this quiet balance will meet something very different. You leave the calm order of the settlement behind and follow the road as it stretches westward. The land gradually changes in subtle ways. The soil becomes slightly rockier, the hills sharper, and the air carries a different dryness. It feels as though you are moving toward a boundary, not one marked by walls or gates, but by culture, by perspective. As the Achaemenid Empire continues to grow under rulers like Darius I, it expands into regions that bring it into contact with the Greek world. This is not yet a collision, not yet a clash, but a quiet awareness. Two different ways of organizing society begin to notice each other across distance. You walk into a coastal region where the air shifts again cooler, touched by the presence of the sea. The sound of waves reaches you faintly rhythmic and steady. Small port settlements appear places where ships arrive and depart carrying goods and ideas between worlds. Here you begin to notice differences more clearly. Greek communities, particularly in areas like Ionia along the western edge of the Persian Empire, have their own traditions of governance. Many are organized as city-states, each with its own system. Some ruled by tyrants, others experimenting with early forms of collective decision-making. It feels more fragmented, more localized compared to the vast centralized structure you have been walking through. Many sources indicate that these Ionian Greek cities fell under Persian control during the expansion of the empire. Yet the relationship is not entirely straightforward. Local leaders often remain in place managing their own affairs while acknowledging Persian authority. You step into one such coastal town. The streets are narrower, lined with stone structures that feel different from the mud brick settlements you passed earlier. The air smells faintly of salt and fish mixed with the scent of wood and smoke. People move with purpose, their conversations carrying a different rhythm, a different tone, and you might begin to sense a quiet tension beneath the surface. It's not loud, not yet visible, but it is there. A subtle awareness that these two worlds, Persian and Greek, do not see things in quite the same way. An interesting detail that does not always receive much attention is how much exchange happens before any major conflict. Trade flows steadily. Greek artisans adopt influences from Persian styles, and Persian administrators learn to navigate the complexities of Greek political structures. There is interaction adaptation, even a degree of mutual curiosity. At the same time, differences remain. The Persian system emphasizes unity across diversity, a vast structure holding many peoples together. Greek city-states, on the other hand, often emphasize independence and local identity. These contrasting approaches create a kind of quiet friction, like two currents moving in slightly different directions. There is ongoing discussion among historians about what truly sparked the eventual conflicts between these worlds. Some interpretations focus on political control and rebellion, particularly in the Ionian cities. Others point to deeper cultural misunderstandings, suggesting that each side viewed the other through its own lens, sometimes inaccurately. As you walk along the harbour, you see ships gently rocking against wooden docks. Sailors move goods, carefully loading and unloading with practiced efficiency. amphorae filled with oil or wine are stacked neatly, while other goods, perhaps textiles or crafted items, are exchanged. You pause for a moment watching the interaction. A Persian official speaks with a local Greek merchant. Their languages differ, but they find ways to communicate. Gestures, shared words, repeated phrases. It is a small but powerful image of connection. And yet you can also feel how fragile that connection might be. The sun begins to lower slightly, casting a softer light across the water. The sea reflects it in gentle ripples, creating a calm, almost hypnotic pattern. It would be easy to believe that this balance could last, but history rarely remains still for long. You leave the harbour and walk toward a higher point overlooking the coastline. From here you can see the meeting of land and sea, the movement of ships, the spread of settlements. It is a place of exchange but also of observation. You begin to sense that this edge of the empire is not just a boundary, but a point of contact where ideas, systems and identities meet, and where they meet they begin to test each other. In modern terms, it might feel similar to cultural crossroads, places where different ways of life intersect, sometimes blending, sometimes resisting. The outcomes are rarely simple. You take a slow breath, the air cooler now as evening approaches. The sounds of the harbour grow softer behind you, replaced by the steady rhythm of the waves below. And as you stand there looking out across the water, you can feel that the quiet awareness between these two worlds is slowly shifting into something more defined. Not yet conflict, but something that is moving in that direction. You turn away from the sea and continue along the path, carrying with you this sense that the next stage of this journey will bring these differences into sharper focus. You move onward from the coastline, leaving behind the steady rhythm of the waves. The land rises again and the air feels drier, carrying the faint scent of dust and sun-warmed stone. The path beneath your feet becomes less travelled, as though you're stepping slightly away from the busy exchanges of the coast and into a quieter space where memory lingers. Yet even here the echoes of what has happened begin to surround you. The earlier tension between the Persian Empire and the Greek world has now taken form in something more visible. What was once subtle has become unmistakable. Not a single moment, not one sudden shift, but a series of events that gradually pull these two worlds into conflict. You walk across an open plain where the ground is flat and wide, stretching far beyond your immediate sight. It feels like a place where something important has happened. The air is still almost heavy, as if holding on to the memory of movement. In the early 5th century BCE, several key battles take place between Persian forces and Greek city-states. Among them are events that later become deeply embedded in historical storytelling, particularly within Greek tradition. One widely recognized example is the Battle of Marathon, where Athenian forces successfully resisted a Persian expedition. Many accounts describe how this battle became a powerful symbol in Greek history, representing resistance against a larger empire. Yet it is important to remember that much of what we know comes from Greek sources, which naturally frame the events from their own perspective. You stand quietly on the imagined edge of such a battlefield. There is no clash here now, no noise, only the faint whisper of wind moving across the plain. It is calm, almost peaceful, which makes it difficult to imagine the intensity that once filled this space. You might find yourself wondering how these events felt to those involved beyond the stories that have been told. Another well-known moment comes from the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where a small Greek force, including Spartans, resisted a much larger Persian army led by Xerxes I. The setting itself a confined passage between mountains and sea shapes how the battle unfolds. An often overlooked detail is how geography plays such a crucial role in these encounters. The vast scale of the Persian army, effective in open terrain, becomes less advantageous in a narrow pass. It is a quiet reminder that even large systems must adapt to the spaces they move through. There is still considerable discussion among historians about the exact numbers involved in these battles. Some ancient sources describe enormous Persian forces, while modern scholars tend to suggest more moderate estimates, pointing out the logistical challenges of maintaining such large armies. As you continue walking, the land shifts again, becoming uneven, marked by stones and small ridges. It feels less like a place of gathering and more like a place of passage of movement under pressure. You notice how these events, while often remembered as dramatic turning points, are part of a longer and more complex relationship. They do not end the connection between Persia and the Greek world. Trade continues. Cultural exchange persists. Even conflict itself becomes part of the interaction. A small but fascinating detail is how, despite the conflicts, Persian influence can still be seen in certain aspects of Greek art and architecture during this period. The exchange of ideas does not stop simply because tension exists. It continues quietly beneath the surface. You pause for a moment, placing your hand on a sun-warmed stone. It holds the heat of the day steady and calm. The simplicity of the moment contrasts with the scale of the events that once unfolded in places like this. And perhaps that is what makes history feel so distant and so close at the same time. We often remember names and outcomes, victories and defeats, but the lived experience, the quiet details, the uncertainty of each moment are harder to grasp. You begin to walk again, moving through a landscape that feels marked by memory rather than visible change. The empire you have been following continues to exist, continues to function, but something has shifted. There is now a clearer sense of division of defined opposition. In modern terms, it might feel similar to how narratives shape understanding. One side tells a story, another tells a different one, and over time, those stories become part of identity. The Persian Empire, vast and structured, sees these events as part of maintaining order across its territories. The Greek city-states, smaller and more independent, frame them as moments of resistance and survival. Both perspectives exist, overlapping, sometimes conflicting. You reach a higher point where the land opens out once more. From here you can see the distant horizon, soft and hazy in the fading light. The day is slowly coming to an end and the air begins to cool again. There is a quiet sense of transition in this moment. The encounters between Persia and the Greek world have left their mark, shaping how each sees the other. These impressions will carry forward, influencing not just future conflicts, but also how history itself is remembered. You take a slow breath, letting the calm of the evening settle around you. And as you continue your journey, you begin to sense that the next change will not come from the west, but from somewhere closer, from within the broader world you have been walking through. Something new is approaching, something that will shift the balance once again. You continue forward as the evening settles gently over the land. The sky fades into softer shades of blue and violet, and the air cools in a way that invites slower movement, quieter thought. The path beneath your feet feels less defined again, as though the certainty you sensed earlier has begun to loosen. There is a change in the atmosphere, something subtle but noticeable. The empire you have been walking through, so carefully organized, so quietly expansive, now feels as if it is pausing, holding its breath. Time has moved forward. Generations have passed since the early unity formed under Cyrus the Great. The empire has grown vast, stretching across regions that once seemed impossibly distant from one another. It has endured conflict, adapted to challenges, and maintained its structure through careful administration. But no system, no matter how well constructed, remains unchanged forever. You step into a larger city now, one that feels older, heavier, with history. The buildings are more imposing, the layout more complex. Yet there is also a quiet weariness in the air. Movement continues, but it lacks the steady confidence you felt before. Many sources suggest that by the time of Darius III, the empire faced internal strains alongside external pressures. Leadership transitions, regional tensions, and the sheer difficulty of managing such a vast territory begin to create subtle weaknesses. You walk through a market that is still active, though the conversations feel more subdued. Traders speak in lower tones, and there is a sense that people are paying closer attention to news, to rumours, to distant events that may soon arrive here. And then quietly at first, another name begins to appear. Alexander the Great. You do not see him directly, not yet. Instead, you notice the signs of his approach. Messengers arriving with urgency. Soldiers preparing more carefully. Maps being studied with greater intensity. A widely accepted account describes how Alexander, a young Macedonian ruler, begins a campaign that moves steadily eastward, defeating Persian forces in a series of engagements. What is striking is not just the speed of his advance, but the way it seems to gather momentum. You step outside the city and follow a road that leads toward an open plain. The air feels tense, though still quiet. It is as if the land itself is aware of what is coming. An often overlooked aspect of this moment is how the Persian Empire, despite its sawires and resources, struggles to respond with the same cohesion it once had. Communication systems still exist, armies are still raised, but the unity that defined earlier periods feels less certain. There is ongoing discussion about why this is the case. Some researchers point to leadership challenges suggesting that Darius III faced difficulties in consolidating authority. Others emphasize the effectiveness of Alexander's strategy, his ability to adapt quickly and maintain the loyalty of his forces. As you continue walking, you come upon a field that feels marked by something recent. The ground is disturbed, though now quiet again. You can almost sense the movement that once filled this space, the energy of opposing forces meeting. Yet now there is only stillness. You might find yourself reflecting on how quickly change can happen, even after long periods of stability. An empire that took generations to build can begin to shift within a much shorter span of time. You move forward again, and gradually the signs of transition become clearer. Persian symbols still remain, but they are joined by new ones. Greek language appears more frequently. Architectural styles begin to blend. It is not an immediate replacement, but a layering. A small but fascinating detail is how in many places local administrators and communities continue their routines, even as political authority changes. Daily life does not stop. People still gather, trade, cook, speak, and rest. The larger shifts happen above them, around them, sometimes without fully disrupting their immediate world. You pass by a group of individuals speaking in a mix of languages, their conversation fluid, adapting to the new reality. It is a quiet example of how cultures do not simply disappear, they adjust, absorb, or transform. You might think of how in modern times changes in power or leadership can feel immediate and overwhelming. Yet on the ground, daily life often continues with a surprising degree of continuity. The sun has now set completely, and the first stars begin to appear again, faint at first, then gradually brighter. The night returns much like the one you began with, though everything has changed. You pause for a moment, looking up at the sky. The Achaemenid Empire, once the dominant force across the vast region, is no longer what it was. It has not vanished entirely, but it has shifted, absorbed into something new. And yet its influence remains. You can feel it in the structure of the cities, in the systems of administration, in the quiet habits of governance that do not disappear overnight. You take a slow breath, letting the cool air settle around you. And as you begin to move forward once more, you sense that this is not an ending, but a transition. Because even in change, even in the shadow of conquest, something of Persia continues waiting to take shape again in a different form. You walk on beneath the sky that is fully darkened, now the stars returning in quiet clusters overhead. The air feels cooler, softer, as though the world itself has exhaled after the changes you have just passed through. The land around you remains familiar. The same hills, the same distant mountains, yet something subtle has shifted. The empire you once followed has changed form, but it has not disappeared. As you move forward, you begin to notice signs of blending rather than replacement. Persian traditions remain present, but they now exist alongside influences brought by the campaigns of Alexander the Great. The result is not a clean break, but a layered world where different identities overlap and interact. You enter a settlement that feels both new and old at the same time. Some buildings follow older Persian designs constructed with mud brick and arranged in familiar patterns. Others reflect Hellenistic influence with more open courtyards, columns, and a different sense of symmetry. The combination is subtle but unmistakable. Records from this period suggest that after Alexander's conquests, much of the former Persian territory became part of a broader Hellenistic world. Greek language and culture spread across these regions, influencing administration, art, and daily life. Yet this influence does not erase what came before. You walk through a market where merchants speak in multiple tongues, shifting between them with ease. One conversation begins in a local Iranian dialect, moves into Greek, then returns again. It feels fluid, natural, as though identity here is not fixed but adaptable. And you might begin to realize that this blending is not unusual in history. Cultures rarely replace one another completely. Instead, they intertwine, leaving traces that continue long after political power changes hands. A small but fascinating detail from this period is how Greek-style cities, often called poleis, are established across parts of the former Persian Empire. These cities serve as centres of administration and culture, but they exist alongside older settlements that maintain their own traditions. There is still some uncertainty about how deeply Hellenistic culture penetrated everyday life in these regions. Some interpretations suggest that its influence was strongest in urban centres and among elites, while rural communities retained more of their earlier customs. Others propose a more widespread blending, though perhaps less visible in the historical record. As you continue walking, you notice a group gathered around a teacher or speaker. The language is unfamiliar at first, but you recognize fragments of Greek thought, philosophical ideas being shared and discussed. Nearby others continue with more traditional practices, preparing food, tending to animals, maintaining routines that feel unchanged. The contrast is gentle, not abrupt. You move toward a quieter part of the settlement where a small structure stands apart from the rest. It appears older, its design rooted in earlier Persian forms. A few individuals approach it with quiet respect, performing simple rituals that feel deeply connected to the land and to memory. This coexistence of old and new creates a kind of balance, though perhaps not a permanent one. You might wonder how long such a balance can last, because while cultures can blend, political structures often shift more quickly. After the death of Alexander, his empire does not remain unified. Instead, it fragments, divided among his generals. One of these successor states, the Seleucid Empire, takes control of much of the former Persian territory. Many accounts describe how this new administration continues to promote Hellenistic culture, while also adapting to the realities of governing such a diverse region. It is a continuation of blending, but also a reminder that control is always changing hands. You walk along a narrow path leading away from the settlement, and the sounds of conversation fade behind you. The night is calm again, filled with the steady presence of stars and the soft movement of wind across the land. There is something reassuring in this continuity. Empires rise, transform and fade, but the land remains. The people remain. Their habits, their stories, their ways of understanding the world continue even as new layers are added. You pause for a moment, listening to the quiet. In modern life, change can feel sudden, immediate, often overwhelming. But here in this slower world, change unfolds more gradually. It is something you walk through step by step, often without realizing how much has shifted until you look back. You take another step forward, feeling the ground steady beneath you. And as you continue your journey, you begin to sense that the next phase will not simply be about blending cultures, but about something else. Something that returns to older patterns yet carries them forward in a new way. A resurgence, perhaps. A reawakening of identity that has never fully disappeared. The night deepens around you as you move onward, guided by the quiet understanding that history does not end with change. It continues reshaping itself again and again. You continue beneath the quiet sky, and slowly the landscape opens once more into wide plains that seem to stretch without end. The air feels lighter here, touched by a steady wind that moves across the grass in soft waves. It carries with it the distant sound of hooves, rhythmic and measured, as if echoing across time. As the Hellenistic world begins to fragment after the death of Alexander the Great, new powers rise from within the lands that once formed the heart of Persia. Among them are the Parthians, a people whose way of life feels closer to the earlier traditions you first encountered. You walk toward the sound of movement and soon see them. Raiders' spars move across the plains with a quiet confidence, their horses steady and responsive. Their clothing is practical, designed for mobility, layered fabrics that protect against both sun and cold. There is a sense of fluidity in the way they travel, as though they are part of the land rather than separate from it. Many sources indicate that the Parthians originating from northeastern regions gradually expand their influence and eventually establish control for much of the former Persian territory. By the mid-3rd century BCE, they begin to form what becomes known as the Persian Empire. You watch as a group of riders practices maneuvers, turning sharply, releasing arrows with precision, then moving again without pause. Their style of warfare is different from the structured formations you might imagine in earlier empires. It is more flexible, more responsive to the open terrain. One detail that rarely gets much attention is how effective mounted archery becomes as a defining feature of Parthian strength. The ability to move quickly, strike from a distance, and withdraw just as swiftly creates a style of engagement that proves difficult for more rigid armies to counter. There is ongoing discussion about how centralized Parthian rule truly was. Some researchers suggest that their empire functioned more as a loose confederation of semi-independent regions, where local rulers maintained significant authority. Others argue that there was a stronger central structure than it might appear, though perhaps less visible in surviving records. As you continue walking, you notice how settlements in this period feel different from those you encountered under earlier Persian rule. Some are smaller, more dispersed, reflecting the continued importance of mobility. Others show signs of urban life, but with a less uniform layout. You pass by a camp where tents are arranged in a wide circle, their fabric moving gently with the wind. A fire burns at the centre, and the scent of cooked meat drifts through the air. People gather quietly, sharing food, speaking in low tones. There is a sense of continuity here, a return to something older yet not unchanged. You might reflect on how history often moves in cycles where elements of the past reappear in new forms. The Parthians, while ruling over lands once organised by the Achaemenids and influenced by Hellenistic culture, bring with them a different emphasis, one that blends mobility with control. You notice a rider approach the camp, dismounting with ease. He carries a message, passing it to another, who listens carefully. Even here, communication remains important, though it feels less formalized than the structured systems you saw before. A small but intriguing detail is how Parthian rulers adopt certain elements of earlier Persian traditions, including royal titles and symbols, while also incorporating influences from the Greek world. It is another example of how identity continues to evolve rather than reset. You step away from the camp and continue across the open land. The wind brushes against your clothing, cool and steady, and the ground feels firm beneath your feet. The sky above is vast, the stars clearer now, without the presence of larger settlements. In the distance, you begin to sense another presence, not immediate but constant. To the west, another great power is rising, one that will come into frequent contact with Huls, Parthians. This is the world of Rome. Many accounts describe how the Parthian Empire and the Roman Republic. Later, the Roman Empire become long-term rivals, their interactions stretching over centuries. Yet this rivalry is not defined by constant conflict. It is a mixture of confrontation, negotiation, and cautious observation. You pause for a moment, looking toward the western horizon where the land fades into darkness. There is something quiet about this kind of rivalry. It is not always visible, not always dramatic, but it shapes the choices of those who live within it. In modern terms, it might feel similar to how distant powers influence each other without always meeting directly. Decisions made far away can still affect the rhythm of daily life. You take a slow breath, the air cool and calm, and as you begin to move forward again, you sense that the world you are walking through is becoming part of a larger network of influence where multiple empires observe one another, adapt and respond. The Parthians hold their place across the plains, maintaining a balance that is both flexible and resilient. But as you continue onward, you begin to feel that this balance, like those before it, will eventually shift. Because beyond the horizon, new ideas, new systems, and new forms of identity are already beginning to take shape. You walk onward across the open plains, the steady wind still brushing against your clothing, carrying with it the quiet rhythm of a land that feels both vast and watchful. The horizon stretches far in every direction, and for a moment it seems as though nothing could disturb this balance. And yet beyond what you can see, another presence remains constant. To the west lies the world of Rome, growing steadily in power and influence. You do not step into it directly, but you can feel its weight like a distant pressure shaping the decisions of those who live here. As the Parthian Empire holds its place across these lands, it becomes part of a long and complex relationship with Rome. Not a single conflict, not a single defining moment, but a series of encounters that unfold over generations. You continue along a quieter path, now one less travelled. where the sounds of movement fade into the background. The land feels more still here, as though it is listening. From what survives in historical records, it becomes clear that these two powers, Parthia and Rome, spend centuries observing one another, sometimes clashing, sometimes negotiating, often maintaining a careful distance. Neither side fully dominates the other. You pause near a small outpost, little more than a cluster of structures built for rest and watchfulness. A few individuals sit outside, their posture relaxed but attentive. Their gaze occasionally shifts toward the west, as though aware of something unseen, but always present. There is a quiet tension in this awareness. You might find yourself wondering what it feels like to live in a world shaped by such distant forces. Not immediate danger, not constant conflict, but the knowledge that somewhere beyond the horizon another power exists, watching just as you are. One moment often mentioned in surviving accounts is the encounter between Roman forces and the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae in the 1st century BCE. In this event, Parthian cavalry demonstrates remarkable effectiveness against Roman legions, particularly through the use of mounted archers and tactical movement. What is interesting here is not just the outcome, but what it reveals about difference. Two systems, two approaches to warfare meeting and testing one another. One more rigid and structured, the other more fluid and adaptable. Still, the details are not always entirely consistent. Different sources describe the encounter in varying ways, shaped by perspective and distance from the event itself. You continue walking and the land begins to change again. Small cultivated areas appear fields, carefully tended water guided through simple channels. Life continues here, steady and grounded, even as larger forces shift around it. In the distance, you see a caravan moving slowly, its pace unhurried. Traders perhaps carrying goods between regions that are influenced by both empires. They move with quiet confidence, accustomed to navigating a world where boundaries are not always clearly defined. A subtle detail that often goes unnoticed is how trade continues even in times of rivalry. Goods, ideas, and even cultural practices pass between regions sometimes more freely than political relationships might suggest. You step closer to the caravan as it pauses near a shaded area. The travellers speak in low voices, sharing food and water. Their clothing reflects a blend of influences, fabrics, and styles drawn from different regions. It is another reminder that everyday life often exists beyond the lines drawn by power. The sun begins to lower once again, casting long shadows across the ground. The heat softens, replaced by a more comfortable coolness that settles in gradually. You sit for a moment on a smooth stone, feeling its surface still warm from the day. The quiet around you feels deeper now, more reflective. In modern times, it can be easy to think of conflict as something immediate and visible, but here it unfolds slowly over long periods, shaping the world in ways that are not always obvious in a single moment. You listen to the distant sounds of the caravan preparing to move again, the soft clink of objects, the gentle movement of animals. It is a calm, almost soothing rhythm. And as you rise and continue your journey, you begin to sense that this long balance between Parthia and Rome, while stable in its own way, is not permanent. Because beyond the patterns of rivalry and coexistence, deeper changes are beginning to form. New ideas, new structures, a renewed sense of identity that will soon rise from within the lands you have been walking through. You take a slow breath, letting the cool evening air settle around you. And as you move forward into the fading light, you feel that something familiar is about to return. Not as it once was, but reshaped, renewed, and ready to define the next chapter. You move forward as night gives way once again to the quiet light of early morning. A pale glow spreads across the horizon, soft and gradual, revealing the outlines of hills and distant structures. The air feels crisp, carrying a sense of renewal, as though something long dormant is beginning to stir again. The Parthian world you have just walked through, flexible and wide-reaching, slowly begins to change. Over time, its loose structure creates openings, small fractures that allow something new to emerge. You follow a narrow path that leads toward a more fortified settlement. Its walls rise higher than those you have seen before, built with intention and strength. There is a feeling of order here, but also of restoration, as if the people within are looking backward as much as forward. This is where another transformation begins. By the early 3rd century CE, A new dynasty rises from within the region, challenging Parthian control and gradually replacing it. This is the beginning of the Sasanian Empire, a state that draws deeply from earlier Persian traditions, while reshaping them for a new era. You step through the gates of the settlement and notice the difference immediately. The layout feels more deliberate, the authority more visible. Guards stand at regular intervals, their presence calm but unmistakable. There is a sense that power here is more centralized, more defined. What becomes clear from surviving evidence is that the Sasanian rulers place a strong emphasis on reviving the legacy of earlier Persian empires, particularly the Achaemenids. They seek continuity not just in territory but in identity. You walk through a courtyard where officials gather their clothing more formal, their roles more clearly structured. There is a renewed focus on hierarchy, on defined ranks, on the visible expression of authority. And you might find yourself reflecting on how cycles in history often bring elements of the past back into focus, though never in exactly the same form. One subtle detail you might not expect is how carefully the Sasanians shape their image. Royal reliefs carved into stone depict rulers with a sense of divine authority linking kingship to a higher order. These images are not just decorative. They are statements quiet but powerful, reinforcing the idea that leadership is both political and sacred. At the center of this renewed identity is religion. You walk toward a structure that stands slightly apart from the rest, its design simple yet dignified. Inside a fire burns steadily, its flame clear and constant. This is a fire temple associated with Zoroastrian practice, which becomes more formally integrated into the state under Sasanian rule. From what we understand, Zoroastrianism plays a significant role in shaping both spiritual and political life during this period. It provides a framework for understanding order, truth, and the role of the king. The picture is not entirely clear when it comes to how uniformly these beliefs are practiced across the empire. Some interpretations suggest a strong alignment between state and religion, while others point to regional variations and continued diversity of belief. You stand quietly near the entrance of the temple, feeling the warmth of the flame even from a distance. The air carries a faint scent of burning wood, clean and steady. There is a calmness here, a sense of continuity that reaches back into earlier times. You might notice how this renewed emphasis on tradition does not erase the influences that came before. Elements of Parthian and Hellenistic culture remain, though they are now framed within a more distinctly Persian identity. As you leave the temple and walk through the streets, you see artisans at work shaping metal carving, stone weaving, fabric. Their movements are careful, precise, reflecting a culture that values both skill and detail. A quieter aspect of this period is how administrative systems become more structured again. Governance is more centralized, taxation more organized, and communication more controlled. It is a return in some ways to the principles you observed in earlier empires, though adapted to a different context. You pass a group of individuals engaged in conversation, their tone serious but calm. They speak of regions, of responsibilities, of matters that extend beyond the immediate surroundings. It is a reminder that this empire, like those before it, stretches far beyond what you can see. The sun rises higher now, warming the stone beneath your feet. The light reflects off surfaces with a soft glow, creating a sense of clarity. And yet beyond this clarity, you can feel that the world is becoming more complex. To the west, the Roman world has evolved into the Byzantine Empire, continuing its long presence as a neighbouring power. The relationship between these two empires, Assyrian and Byzantine, becomes a defining feature of the region. There is not always open conflict, but there is constant awareness, a sense of proximity that shapes decisions on both sides. You step beyond the walls of the settlement and look out across the land once more. The patterns are familiar now: rise, adaptation, renewal. You take a slow breath, letting the morning air settle within you. And as you begin to move forward again, you sense that this renewed Persian identity, strong and structured, will soon be tested in ways that are not yet visible. Because beyond the systems, beyond the traditions, new forces are beginning to gather quietly just beyond the horizon. You continue forward as the morning light settles gently across the land. The city behind you grows quieter with distance, its structured walls and ordered streets fading into the background. Ahead, the terrain feels more open again, yet there is a lingering sense of presence, something deeper than architecture or governance. You follow a narrow path that leads toward another sacred space, one that feels less like a center of administration and more like a place of reflection. The air is still carrying a faint warmth, and the ground beneath your feet is smooth from repeated passage. As the Sasanian world takes shape, spiritual life becomes more visible, more formal, woven directly into the structure of society. The flame you saw earlier was not an isolated detail. It is part of a broader system of belief that influences daily routines, political authority, and the way people understand their place in the world. You step into a fire temple, its interior calm and softly lit. At its center, a flame burns steadily, carefully tended so that it never goes out. The light flickers gently against the walls, casting slow-moving shadows that seem to breathe with the room. From what we understand, Zoroastrianism during this period emphasizes a dualistic view of existence, a balance between forces often described as truth and falsehood, order and chaos. This perspective shapes not only spiritual thought, but also the idea of kingship. You notice how those who enter the temple move with quiet intention. Their gestures are measured, respectful. There is no urgency here, only a steady rhythm of practice that has been repeated countless times. And you might find yourself wondering how belief systems like this influence entire societies, not just in grand decisions, but in the smallest moments of daily life. One detail that tends to stay in the background is how closely the Sasanian rulers align themselves with this religious framework. Kings are not only political leaders, but also seen as guardians of order responsible for maintaining balance within the world. This connection between leadership and spirituality adds another layer to governance. Authority is no longer just about control or administration. It becomes something more symbolic, more deeply rooted in shared belief. The exact nature of this relationship is not entirely settled in historical interpretation. Some sources suggest a strong and direct integration between religious authorities and the state, while others indicate a more complex interaction with periods of cooperation and tension. You step back from the flame, feeling its warmth fade slightly as you move toward the entrance. Outside, the world feels brighter, the sunlight more immediate, yet the calm of the temple lingers. As you walk through the surrounding area, you notice how religious practices extend beyond the temple itself. Small rituals appear in daily routines. Offerings placed carefully, words spoken with intention. It is not confined to a single space, but woven into the fabric of life. You pass by a group of individuals engaged in quiet conversation. Their tone is thoughtful, reflective. They speak not only of practical matters, but also of meaning, of right action, of the unseen balance that guides their world. It creates a different kind of atmosphere, one where even ordinary moments carry a sense of significance. A subtle aspect of this period is how religious identity begins to define boundaries more clearly. While earlier empires often allowed a wide range of practices with minimal distinction, the Sasanian approach introduces a stronger sense of alignment, a clearer framework of belief tied to the state. You might notice how this begins to shape interactions with neighboring regions. Differences in belief, once less emphasized, become more visible, more important. The air grows warmer as the day progresses, and you move along a shaded path lined with low walls. The stone feels cool beneath your hand as you pass, offering a small contrast to the rising heat. In the distance, you can see travelers approaching, their figures small against the wide landscape. They carry news, goods, and perhaps ideas from beyond the empire's borders, and with them, the awareness that the world beyond is not standing still. To the west, the Byzantine Empire continues to develop its own identity, deeply shaped by Christianity. To the east and south, other regions hold their own traditions, their own ways of understanding the world. These differences do not always lead to conflict, but they do create contrast, a sense of distinction that grows over time. You pause for a moment beneath a patch of shade, listening to the quiet sounds around you. The distant voices, the movement of wind, the faint echo of footsteps. There is a calm here, but also a sense of preparation, as though the structures you are seeing, political, spiritual, cultural, are setting the stage for something that has not yet arrived. You take a slow breath, letting the warmth and stillness settle within you, And as you begin to walk again, you feel that the next shift in this long story will not come from within the empire, but from beyond it. Something new is approaching, not as a gradual blending, but as a transformation that will reshape everything you've seen so far. You walk onward into a day that feels heavier than the ones before it. The air is warmer, but not in a comforting way. It lingers, pressing gently against your skin, carrying with it a quiet sense of strain. The land stretches out as it always has, but there is something different in how it feels, as though the ground itself has grown tired. The Sasanian world around you remains structured, deliberate, and deeply rooted in its traditions. Cities continue to function, temples remain active, and authority is still clearly defined. And yet beneath all of this, something is beginning to wear down. You follow a road that leads between fortified settlements, noticing how the walls seem thicker, here more defensive. Guards are present more often, their watchfulness steady, but perhaps a little more alert than before. To the west, the long-standing presence of the Byzantine Empire remains constant. This is not a new relationship. It has been unfolding for generations, a slow and continuous interaction marked by both conflict and negotiation. But now the rhythm of that interaction feels more intense. You pass through a quiet checkpoint where travellers are briefly observed before being allowed to continue. There is no hostility, only caution, a sign that the world beyond is no longer something distant but something that presses closer. For years, these two empires, Sasanian and Byzantine, have engaged in cycles of warfare. Campaigns move back and forth across contested regions, particularly in areas like Mesopotamia and Armenia. Cities change hands, then change again. Armies advance, then withdraw. But what you begin to notice is not just the presence of conflict, but its duration. It does not end quickly. It stretches across time, repeating in different forms, wearing down resources, energy, and stability. You walk past a group of labourers repairing a section of road. Their movements are steady, but slower than the purposeful rhythm you observed in earlier periods. Nearby, a supply caravan pauses its animals, resting its drivers, speaking in low measured tones. There is a feeling here of effort, of maintenance rather than expansion, and you might find yourself reflecting on how even strong systems can begin to feel the weight of constant pressure, not through sudden collapse, but through gradual exhaustion. As you continue, the land becomes more uneven, dotted with small fortifications and outposts. Each one stands as a quiet reminder of vigilance, of the need to watch, to prepare to respond. You come upon a hillside where you can look out across a wide valley. The view is calm, almost beautiful in its stillness. But there is also a sense that this landscape has seen movement, that it has carried the footsteps of armies more than once. The stories of these wars are not always clear in their details. Some accounts describe victories and defeats with confidence, while others leave gaps, uncertainties that have never been fully resolved. The passage of time softens the edges, leaving impressions rather than precise outlines. You sit for a moment on a fat stone, letting the quiet settle around you. The wind moves gently through the grass, creating a soft, continuous sound. It is easy in this moment to forget the scale of what has been happening. But the signs are there in the guarded roads, in the watchful eyes, in the careful movement of goods and people. A small, easily missed detail is how these prolonged conflicts begin to affect ordinary life. Trade routes shift slightly, avoiding certain areas. Supplies become more carefully managed. Communities adapt, adjusting to a world where stability cannot be fully assumed. You rise and continue along the path, feeling the slight incline beneath your feet. The sun moves higher, casting sharper light across the land, highlighting the textures of stone and earth. In the distance, you see a cluster of buildings that appear quieter than others. Fewer people move between them. The space feels more still, as though time has slowed here. You pass through it gently, noticing how even in these quieter places the presence of the larger world is still felt. A distant rumour, a traveller's story, a subtle change in routine. And you begin to sense that this long train, this continuous effort to maintain balance, is creating conditions for something new. Not something that emerges from strength, but something that finds space in fatigue. You take a slow breath, the warm air settling in your chest, and as you continue forward, leaving behind the valley and its quiet memories, You feel that the next chapter of this journey will not come from the familiar patterns of empire and rivalry. It will come from something unexpected, something that begins quietly, almost unnoticed, but will soon reshape everything. You continue walking as the warmth of the day softens into evening once more. The light fades slowly, stretching across the land in long golden tones, before settling into a calm, dim glow. The air feels gentler now, carrying a quiet stillness that invites you to slow your steps. The world around you still bears the marks of long rivalry and quiet exhaustion. The Sasanian Empire stands structured and deeply rooted, yet touched by the strain you sensed before. Rows remain active settlements, continue their routines, but there is a subtle openness now, a space that has begun to form. You follow a narrow path that leads away from the fortified regions and into a quieter stretch of land. The ground here feels less worn, the movement of people lighter, less frequent. The sky above deepens into soft shades of blue and the first stars begin to appear once again. It is here in these quieter spaces that something new begins to emerge. Not as an army, not as a visible force, but as an idea. From the southern regions in lands that have long been connected through trade and shared movement, a new religious message begins to spread. At first, it travels slowly, carried by individuals rather than institutions, or shared in conversations rather than proclaimed in grand displays. You walk toward a small gathering near a modest fire. The people sit close together, their voices low, their expressions thoughtful. There is a sense of listening here, of careful attention. The message they speak of centers on a single unified understanding of the divine. It emphasizes moral responsibility, community, and a different way of structuring belief in daily life. At this stage, it is still early, still forming, still finding its place. You might notice how different this feels from the structured religious system you observed earlier. There are no large temples here, no formal rituals tied to state authority. Instead, there is a simplicity, a directness that resonates quietly among those who hear it. The story of how this message begins and spreads is not entirely uniform in its telling. Different traditions preserve different details, shaping the early narrative in ways that reflect their own perspectives. What remains consistent is the sense that something meaningful is taking root. You sit near the edge of the gathering, listening as the conversation continues. The fire flickers softly, casting warm light across the faces around it. The air carries the faint scent of smoke and earth, grounding the moment in something immediate and real. A detail that can easily pass unnoticed is how this early movement grows, not through force, but through connection. Relationships form, trust builds. The message moves from one person to another, gradually expanding its reach. You might reflect on how ideas often travel in this way quietly, at first almost invisible, until they reach a point where their presence can no longer be ignored. As time moves forward, this new faith begins to intersect with the larger world you've been walking through. It reaches regions influenced by the Sasanian Empire, encountering established systems of belief and governance. The interaction is not simple. In some places, the message is received with openness. In others, it meets resistance. The existing structures, both political and religious, are deeply rooted, and any new idea must find its place within or alongside them. You rise and continue along the path, the night growing deeper around you. The stars now fill the sky, fully steady and bright, offering a quiet sense of continuity. The land feels calm again, but it is a different kind of calm. Not the stillness of stability, but the quiet before transformation becomes visible. You pass by a traveller moving in the opposite direction. He carries little, his pace unhurried. As he passes, there is a brief exchange of acknowledgement, a simple moment that feels part of a much larger pattern. The spread of this new faith will not remain small. Over time, it will reshape regions, influence governance, and redefine identity in ways that are not yet visible in this quiet moment. You might find yourself thinking about how the world you have walked through with its empires, its systems, its long histories is now approaching a turning point. Not an abrupt ending, but a gradual shift. You take a slow breath, feeling the cool night air settle around you, And as you continue forward, you sense that the next stage of this journey will bring this new idea into clearer view, not just as a quiet presence, but as a force that will begin to change the structure of the world itself. You move forward beneath a sky filled with quiet starlight, the path ahead, faint but steady beneath your feet. The air has cooled further now, carrying a softness that seems to slow everything down. Even your thoughts feel more measured, as though the world itself is asking you to walk gently through this moment. The small gathering you left behind fades into the distance, its voices replaced by the subtle sounds of night. And yet what you heard there does not disappear. It lingers not as noise, but as presence. As time continues to pass, the new faith you encountered begins to expand beyond those quiet circles. It reaches into cities, into trade routes, into places shaped by older empires and long traditions. It does not erase what came before, but it begins to reshape it. You follow a road that leads toward a familiar kind of settlement, one with walls, gates, and organized streets. At first glance, it feels much like the Sasanian cities you've already walked through. But as you move closer, you begin to notice subtle differences. The rhythms are changing. Markets remain active. Voices still fill the streets, but there is a shift in tone. Conversations carry new words, new expressions. Practices that once felt central now share space with something else, something that is still settling into place. From what can be gathered across historical accounts, the expansion of Islamic rule into former Sasanian territories in the 7th century unfolds over a relatively short period of time compared to the long histories you have been walking through. The structure of the Sasanian Empire, already weakened by prolonged conflict, begins to give way. You pass through the city gate, noticing how the guards are still present, though their attire and symbols feel different. Authority has not vanished, but it has changed form. You walk along a street lined with shops where traders continue their work, much as they always have. Goods are exchanged, prices discussed, routines maintained. Life continues. And you might find yourself reflecting on how even during periods of significant change, daily life often carries on with a quiet persistence. A detail that sits gently beneath the surface is how many administrative practices from earlier Persian systems continue to influence governance under new leadership. Systems of taxation, regional organization, and communication do not simply disappear. They are adapted, reshaped to fit a new framework. The picture grows more complex when you consider how belief and identity evolve during this time. For some, the new faith is adopted, gradually integrated into their understanding of the world. For others, older traditions remain important, continuing alongside new practices. There is no single path, no uniform experience. You step into a quieter courtyard where a small group gathers in prayer. Their movements are coordinated, their voices soft, carrying a rhythm that feels both structured and calm. It is different from the fire temples you saw earlier, yet it holds its own sense of order and reflection. You pause at a respectful distance, observing without interrupting. The air feels still here, grounded, though time itself has slowed slightly. Beyond the courtyard, the city continues its gentle movement. Children pass by their laughter light. An older figure sits in the shade, watching the world with quiet familiarity. These moments, small and ordinary, remain unchanged. A subtle shift that can be felt rather than easily seen is how identity begins to reorganize. Where once it was closely tied to empire and dynasty, it now becomes increasingly connected to belief and community. This does not happen all at once, but it unfolds gradually layer by layer. Different interpretations exist about how quickly these changes take hold and how deeply they affect various regions. Some areas seem to adapt more readily, while others hold more firmly to earlier traditions. The variation itself becomes part of the story. You leave the courtyard and continue along the street, noticing how the architecture remains largely familiar. Buildings still reflect earlier designs, materials, and methods. Change here is not about replacing everything, but about reshaping what already exists. The sun has long set, but the city remains softly lit by the lamps and fires. The glow is warm, steady, creating a calm atmosphere that feels almost timeless. You step beyond the city walls once more, returning to the open land. The night air greets you again, cool and quiet. And as you walk, you begin to sense that this transformation is not just about governance or belief, but about continuity within change. The Persian identity you have been following does not vanish. It adapts, absorbs, and continues even as new layers are added. You take a slow breath, the stillness settling around you, and as you move forward into the deeper night, you feel that the story is shifting once again, not toward disappearance, but toward preservation to new form. Something that will carry forward even through the centuries ahead. You continue walking through the quiet night, the city now behind you, its soft lights fading into the distance. The land opens once again into gentle slopes and wide dark plains, where the only sound is the steady rhythm of your steps and the faint whisper of wind moving across the ground. There is a calm here that feels familiar, yet something about it has changed. The world you've been moving through is no longer defined by a single empire or a single system. Instead, it feels layered, as though different moments in time are resting on top of one another. You follow a narrow path that leads toward a smaller settlement, one less formal, less structured than the cities you passed before. A few low buildings sit quietly together, their walls catching the faint glow of starlight. Somewhere nearby, a soft voice carries through the air, steady and rhythmic. As you move closer, you realize it is not conversation, but recitation. Inside one of the buildings, a small group has gathered. They sit close together, listening as someone speaks lines that seem to flow with a careful cadence. The words are measured, repeated, remembered. You sit near the doorway just outside the circle of light and listen. Over time, the Persian language begins to take on new forms. It absorbs influences from Arabic, adapts to new scripts, and gradually evolves into what will later be recognized as New Persian. This transformation does not happen suddenly. It unfolds slowly, shaped by generations who continue to speak, write, and preserve their identity through language. You might notice how this feels different from earlier shifts. Empires changed, rulers came and went, but language carries something deeper. It holds memory, emotion, and continuity in a way that structures alone cannot. The recitation continues, the voice calm and steady. There is a rhythm to it that feels almost soothing, as though the words themselves are meant to be carried gently through time. One quiet detail you begin to notice is how storytelling becomes a central way of preserving identity. Poetry in particular grows in importance. It becomes a space where history, culture, and belief can be expressed without needing the support of political power. The exact moment when this literary tradition fully takes shape is not entirely clear. It seems to emerge gradually influenced by earlier oral practices as well as new written forms. What matters more is that it endures. You step away from the doorway and continue along the path, the sound of the recitation fading softly behind you. The night air feels cool against your skin, and the ground beneath your feet is smooth in places worn by quiet movement over time. You can almost imagine how many others have walked here before carrying stories, ideas, and fragments of identity with them. In the distance, you see another small group gathered around a fire. Their voices are softer, less structured, but still intentional. Laughter rises briefly, then settles again into calm conversation. You pause nearby, listening without interrupting. They speak of past kings, of distant lands, of moments that feel both real and shaped by memory. The stories are not always precise. Details shift, timelines blur, but the essence remains. And you might find yourself reflecting on how memory works, how it preserves meaning even when it cannot preserve every detail. A subtle shift begins to take shape here. Where identity was once tied closely to empire and authority, it now begins to root itself in culture, in language, in shared understanding. It becomes something that can exist even without a central power to define it. You sit for a moment near the fire, feeling its warmth against the cool night air. The scent of burning wood drifts gently upward, mixing with the faint smell of earth and dry grass. In modern life, we often store information in ways that feel permanent, written, recorded, backed up endlessly. But here preservation feels more fragile, more human. It depends on memory, on repetition, on the willingness of each generation to carry something forward. You rise slowly and continue your journey, leaving the fire behind. The stars above remain steady, their quiet presence unchanged across centuries. Beneath them, the people of this land continue to shape their identity in ways that do not rely on borders or rulers alone. You begin to sense that this form of continuity is more resilient than it first appears. Because while political structures can shift quickly, culture moves more slowly. It adapts, absorbs, and persists, often in ways that are not immediately visible. You take a slow breath, letting the stillness settle around you. And as you move forward into the deeper night, you feel that the story you are walking through is no longer just about empires rising and falling. It is about something quieter, something that stays. You continue beneath the quiet sky, the stars now fully settled above you, steady and distant. The land feels softer here, less marked by roads and structures, more shaped by time itself. Your steps slow without you realizing it, as though the story you're walking through has become gentler, more inward. In the distance, you notice a cluster of lights not large enough to be a city, but more than a simple gathering. As you draw closer, you begin to hear voices low and steady, carrying a tone that feels both thoughtful and deeply felt. You step quietly into the edge of the gathering. People sit in a circle, their expressions calm, their attention focused. The conversation is not loud, not urgent, but it carries weight. It speaks of belief, of leadership, of who should guide a community and why that guidance matters. This is a time when ideas about authority within the Islamic world are still forming, still being shaped through discussion, interpretation, and experience. The early unity that followed the spread of the new faith begins to give way to different understandings of leadership. You listen as someone speaks with quiet conviction, describing the importance of lineage of continuity through a specific family line. Another responds gently, offering a different perspective, one that emphasizes community consensus. There is no anger here, only difference. And yet you can sense how these differences will grow. Over time, these discussions begin to form clearer distinctions, eventually contributing to what will be known as the divide between Sunni and Shia traditions. It does not appear suddenly. It unfolds gradually, shaped by events, interpretations, and the passage of generations. You might find yourself reflecting on how divisions often begin in small, thoughtful conversations like this, not in conflict, but in perspective. The night air feels still, almost protective, as though it is holding these voices in a quiet space where they can be heard without interruption. A detail that often remains in the background is how deeply these early conversations are connected to memory and loyalty. The question of leadership is not only political, but personal. It is tied to relationships, to shared history, to the way individuals understand their connection to the past. The full picture of how these ideas developed is not entirely clear. Different accounts emphasize different moments, different figures, different turning points. What remains consistent is that these perspectives continue to shape communities long after they first emerge. You step back slightly, allowing the voices to blend into a softer hum. Nearby, a small fire burns its light, flickering gently against the ground. The scent of smoke rises into the cool night, familiar and calming. It reminds you of earlier moments of other gatherings of stories shared under similar skies. There is a continuity here, even within change. You walk a little further, and the sounds of the gathering begin to fade. The land opens again, and the quiet returns deeper, now more reflective. In the distance, you see a simple structure, its outline barely visible in the low light. It feels like a place of rest, of quiet thought. You approach slowly, your steps measured. Inside, a few individuals sit in silence, their posture relaxed, their presence calm. There is no speaking here, only stillness. You sit for a moment near the entrance, letting the quiet settle around you, and you begin to sense how belief once introduced continues to evolve, not just through discussion, but through reflection, through lived experience. In modern times, differences in belief can feel sharp, clearly defined. But here in this earlier moment, they are still forming, still fluid, still part of an ongoing process. You rise again, stepping back into the open air. The stars remain unchanged, their light steady and distant. Beneath them, people continue to shape their understanding of the world, slowly, thoughtfully, sometimes without realizing how lasting their ideas will become. You take a slow breath, the cool air filling your lungs. And as you continue forward, you feel that these quiet conversations, these early differences will not fade. They will carry forward influencing identities, relationships, and the shape of communities in ways that extend far beyond this moment. The path ahead remains calm, but you can sense that the ideas you have just witnessed will echo through the centuries to come. You move forward into the early hours before dawn when the world feels especially quiet, as if it is resting between breaths. The sky above is still dark, though a faint line of pale light begins to gather along the horizon. The air is cool, almost still, carrying a softness that makes every step feel slower. The land you walk through has changed many times, already shaped by empires, beliefs, and quiet acts of preservation. And now, once again, something new begins to take form, though at first it does not appear loudly or all at once. You follow a path that leads toward a larger settlement, one that feels more unified than the scattered places you have seen in recent sections of your journey. There is a sense of direction here, of intention returning. As the centuries pass, a new dynasty rises from within the region, gradually bringing much of the Iranian plateau under a single authority again. This is the Safavid period, a moment when Persia, now more commonly referred to as Iran, begins to take on a more defined and unified identity. You step through the gates of the city and notice how the atmosphere feels different from before. There is a renewed sense of cohesion. Streets are busier, but not chaotic. People move with purpose as though they are part of something shared and understood. At the heart of this transformation is the establishment of Twelver Shia Islam as the official state religion. This decision shapes not only spiritual life, but also political identity, creating a clearer distinction between this region and its neighbours. You might find yourself reflecting on how belief, once a matter of discussion and gradual development, now becomes something more formal, more structured within the framework of the state. You walk through a wide square where people gather in small groups, their conversations calm but engaged. The buildings around you are more refined, their design more deliberate, hinting at a growing emphasis on visual identity and cultural expression. What becomes visible here is a shift toward unity through both governance and belief. And yet this unity does not erase the layers that came before. Instead, it builds upon them, drawing from earlier traditions while shaping something distinct. You pass by a group of scholars, seated beneath a shaded structure, their discussion quiet but focused. They speak of interpretation of meaning, of how belief should be understood and practiced. Their words are measured, thoughtful, reflecting a culture that values reflection as much as authority. The details of how this transformation unfolds are not always entirely clear. Different accounts highlight different aspects, some emphasizing political consolidation, others focusing on religious development. The full picture seems to emerge only when these perspectives are considered together. You continue walking and notice how the city extends outward in a more organized way than before. Markets, homes, and places of learning are arranged with intention. There is a sense that space itself is being shaped to reflect identity. A quieter detail that sits beneath the surface is how this period also brings increased interaction with neighbouring powers. The Ottoman Empire to the west and other regional forces create a context where distinction becomes important, where identity is defined not only internally but also in relation to others. You step into a narrow street where the light has just begun to return, casting a soft glow against the walls. The air carries the scent of early morning cool and slightly damp. A shopkeeper begins to open his door, moving slowly, unhurried. The day is beginning just as it has for countless generations before. You pause for a moment watching this simple act. It reminds you that even within periods of transformation, daily life continues with a quiet consistency. People wake, work, speak, rest. The larger shifts happen around them, shaping the world they move through, but not always changing the rhythm of each individual day. In modern times, we often think of identity in clear, defined terms linked to borders, politics, and belief systems. But here you can see how it forms, gradually shaped by layers of history, by choices made over time, by the blending and redefinition of what came before. You step back into the open square, the light now stronger, revealing more detail into the buildings and the faces of those around you. There is a sense of calm here, but also of clarity. Something has taken shape. You take a slow breath, feeling the morning air settle around you. And as you begin to move forward again, you sense that this more defined identity, here carefully formed and deeply rooted, will soon encounter a world that is changing in new and unfamiliar ways. Because beyond these walls, beyond these carefully shaped spaces, other forces are beginning to take interest in this land once more. You continue walking as the morning light grows softer and more complete, spreading gently across the city and the land beyond it. The air carries a calm warmth, now no longer cool but not yet heavy. It feels like a moment of balance where everything moves at a steady, unhurried pace. The streets you pass through become wider, more refined. There is a quiet elegance in the way the buildings rise their surfaces, reflecting light in soft shades of blue and earth tones. As you move forward, the city opens into something more expansive, more deliberate. You begin to sense that you are entering a place shaped not only by governance and belief, but by beauty itself. This is a time when cities like Isfahan become centers of culture, art, and daily life, carefully designed to reflect both order and harmony. You step into a large open square, its space wide and balanced, surrounded by structures that feel both grand and calm at the same time. The sound of your footsteps softens against the smooth ground as you walk. Around you, people move quietly, some carrying goods, others simply passing through. There is no rush, no urgency. The rhythm of the city feels measured, almost peaceful. You look up and notice the intricate patterns that cover the surfaces of nearby buildings. Tiles arranged with precision, their colours blending into soft geometric designs. The sunlight touches them gently, creating a subtle glow that shifts as you move. It is not overwhelming, it is calming. You might find yourself reflecting on how environments like this are designed not just for function, but for feeling. The space itself encourages stillness, encourages presence. You walk toward a shaded area where a few individuals sit speaking quietly. Their voices carry lightly through the air, blending with the distant sounds of movement from the rest of the city. A small detail that sits quietly within this moment is how urban planning during this period becomes more intentional. Public spaces are designed to bring people together to create a sense of shared experience. It is not just about building structures, but about shaping how people move and interact within them. You continue walking, passing by a long corridor lined with arches. The light filters through in soft patterns, creating alternating spaces of brightness and shadow. As you move, the temperature shifts slightly with each step, cool in the shade, warm in the light. The sensory experience is gentle, almost meditative. There is a quiet understanding here that beauty and order are connected, that the way a place looks and feels can influence how people live within it. At the same time, the world beyond these walls is beginning to change. You notice travellers arriving from distant regions, their clothing and manner carrying subtle differences. They speak of lands far away, of growing interest in trade, of connections that stretch beyond what was once familiar. The picture becomes a little less clear here as accounts from this period begin to reflect increasing contact with European powers. Merchants, diplomats, and explorers move between regions, bringing with them not only goods, but also new perspectives. You pause near the small fountain, its water moving quietly, creating a soft, continuous sound. It adds to the calm of the space, a gentle reminder of flow and continuity. You might think about how trade routes once limited to nearby regions are now expanding, connecting distant parts of the world more directly. What was once a network of neighbouring lands is becoming something broader, and with that comes attention. You step away from the fountain and walk toward the edge of the city. From here you can see the surrounding landscape open and wide, stretching into the distance. It feels peaceful, but also exposed. A subtle shift begins to take shape. Interest from outside grows, not always visible in daily life, but present in the background. Resources, location, influence, all of these begin to matter in new ways. You take a slow breath, the air warm and steady. The city behind you remains calm, beautiful, carefully balanced. But beyond it, the world is becoming more interconnected, more aware, more involved. You begin to move forward again, leaving the quiet elegance of this place behind. And as you walk, you feel that the next phase of this journey will bring that outside attention into clearer focus, not just as distant presence, but as something that will begin to shape decisions from within. The balance you feel here is real, but it is not untouched. It is being observed. You continue beyond the city's edge, where the carefully arranged streets give way to open land once again. The quiet beauty of tiled walls and shaded courtyards fades behind you, replaced by wide fields and long patient roads that stretch toward distant horizons. The air feels different out here, less contained, carrying the faint scent of dust, dry grass, and something else, something unfamiliar. It feels like movement, like the sense that the world is opening outward in ways it has not before. You follow a road that has clearly been travelled, often its surface worn smooth by caravans and footsteps over time. Soon you begin to see them, travellers, not just from nearby regions but from much farther away. Their clothing carries subtle differences, their posture slightly unfamiliar, their speech shaped by languages you have not heard before. Some move with confidence accustomed to long journeys. Others pause more often, taking in their surroundings with careful attention. You step aside as a caravan passes, its pace steady, unhurried. Pack animals carry goods wrapped tightly in cloth, protected from the elements. The people guiding them speak in low voices, occasionally pointing towards the road ahead. Trade has always been part of this land, but now it feels broader, more connected. Routes that once linked neighbouring regions are extending further, reaching across continents. Goods move in both directions: textiles, spices, metals, ideas. The land you are walking through is no longer just part of a regional system. It's becoming part of something larger. You walk alongside the caravan for a short distance, listening to the fragments of conversation. A word here, a phrase there, hints of distant places, unfamiliar climates, long voyages across sea and land. And you might find yourself thinking about how these connections slowly reshape the world, not through sudden change, but through repeated contact, through exchange, through curiosity. You notice one traveller carrying a small object carefully wrapped. When he unwraps it briefly, perhaps to show a companion, you glimpse something finely crafted, delicate, unlike the objects you have seen before. It's a small moment, easily missed, but it speaks of difference of the meeting of worlds. You continue walking as the caravan turns slightly, following a different path. The road you remain on leads toward another settlement, one that feels busier than the last. As you approach, you begin to notice a different kind of presence. Foreign visitors are more common here. Some move through the streets with ease, while others stand out slightly, their attention drawn to details that locals pass without notice. There is a quiet exchange happening, not just of goods, but of observation. You walk through a market where voices rise and fall in a gentle rhythm. Sellers arrange their items carefully, buyers examine them with the practiced hands. Among them you notice a few individuals who seem to be watching more than participating. They take notes, they observe, they ask questions. The full meaning of this growing attention is not entirely clear in this moment. It feels subtle, almost harmless, but it carries a quiet significance. You step into a shaded corner where a few travellers rest. One speaks of distant ports of ships that carry goods across vast waters. Another mentions lands where the climate is cooler, where cities rise in ways that feel different from those here. Their words are calm, but they carry a sense of expansion of a world becoming more connected, more aware of itself. A small detail that sits quietly within this scene is how knowledge begins to travel alongside trade. Maps improve, routes become better understood. Information once limited to local regions starts to move more freely. You might reflect on how this growing awareness changes perception. Places that once felt distant and separate begin to feel closer, more reachable. And with that closeness comes interest. You leave the market and walk toward the outskirts of the settlement. The sounds soften again, replaced by the steady rhythm of wind and distant movement. The sun is higher now, casting clear light across the land. Shadows shorten, details sharpen. You pause for a moment and look back. The settlement behind you feels calm, active, balanced. And yet there is something new woven into it, something that was not as present before. Observation, interest, connection. You take a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the day settle around you. And as you turn forward again, continuing along the open road, you sense that this growing network of exchange will not remain neutral. Because attention, once it deepens, often leads to involvement. And involvement over time begins to shape decisions in ways that are not always visible at first. The path ahead remains quiet, but it is leading somewhere new. You continue along the road as the day slowly begins to soften, the light turning warmer, less direct. The air carries a gentle stillness again, as if the world is easing into a quieter rhythm after the steady movement of trade and travel you have just passed through. The land ahead feels slightly different. Not in a way that is easy to name, but in the way small changes begin to gather almost unnoticed at first. The road is still there, the settlement's still active, but something beneath it all is shifting like a current moving just below the surface. You walk toward a larger town, one that seems more aware of the world beyond it. The streets are active, but the tone feels more watchful. People still trade, still speak, still move through their routines, but there is a subtle attentiveness in the air. As you pass through the market, you notice conversations that pause when unfamiliar voices approach. Glances that linger just a moment longer than before. Not fear, not suspicion exactly, but awareness. You move slowly, letting the details reveal themselves in their own time. At the far end of the square, a small group has gathered around a man holding a piece of paper. He reads quietly, his voice steady, while others listen. The words seem to come from far away, carried across distance, translated, interpreted, passed from hand to hand. You do not hear everything clearly, but you catch fragments. Mentions of agreements, of influence, of interests that reach beyond the land you are standing on. You might not fully understand it yet, but you can feel that something has begun to change in how this place relates to the outside world. You continue walking, leaving the small gathering behind. The streets narrow slightly, leading into quieter spaces where the sounds of the market fade into the background. A door stands partially open. Inside, two individuals sit across from one another, speaking in low tones. Their conversation feels careful, measured. There is a sense that the words matter, that they are choosing them with intention. You pause just long enough to sense the mood. It is not the easy exchange of goods or stories you have seen before. It carries weight, something closer to negotiation. The edges of this moment feel slightly blurred, as though you are catching only a glimpse of something that is still forming. You step away and continue along the path, the town gradually giving way to open land once more. The sky above shifts into softer colours as the sun begins its slow descent. Light stretches across the ground, long and golden, touching everything with a gentle warmth. You walk in silence for a while, letting the quiet settle again. And as you do, you begin to notice something else. The land itself feels more connected than it once did. Not just through roads and trade, but through attention. Through the growing awareness of distant powers that now look toward this region with interest. You might reflect on how attention can change a place without altering it immediately. Nothing here looks dramatically different. The fields are still tended, the roads are still walked, the cities still breathe with their familiar rhythm, but the sense of being observed, of being part of something larger, begins to settle in. You reach a small rise in the land and pause, looking back. The town you left behind appears calm, almost unchanged in the fading light, and yet you know now that it is not untouched. Something has entered quietly, not as a force, not as a visible presence, but as influence. You take a slow breath, the air cooling as evening approaches. In the distance, you can just make out another group of travellers moving along a different road. Their direction is uncertain, their purpose unclear, but their presence feels connected to the same quiet shift you have been sensing. You begin to walk again, your steps slow and steady. The world you are moving through is no longer isolated. It is part of a wider network now, one where decisions made far away begin to ripple inward. And as the light fades further and the sky deepens into evening once more, you feel that the next stage of this journey will bring that influence closer, more visible, more difficult to ignore. For now, though, everything remains calm, soft, folding in its own time. You continue as evening settles more deeply across the land, the last traces of daylight fading into a soft, muted glow. The road beneath your feet feels quieter now, as though fewer travellers have passed this way recently. The air is still carrying a faint coolness that gently replaces the warmth of the day. Ahead, a new kind of space begins to take shape. The settlement you approach is larger than the last, but not in the same balanced way you felt before. Its buildings rise with a certain elegance, yet there is something uneven beneath that surface. The streets are active, but the rhythm feels slightly off, as though different parts of the city are moving at different speeds. You step through the outer edge and begin to notice it more clearly. Some areas are well maintained, their structures carefully preserved and their spaces open and ordered. Other areas feel more worn, their walls weathered, their streets less attended. The contrast is subtle, but it lingers. You walk slowly, allowing the details to reveal themselves without forcing them into clarity. In one part of the city, you pass a group of officials gathered near a shaded courtyard. Their clothing is refined, their posture composed. Their conversation is quiet but purposeful, as though they are discussing matters that extend beyond what can be seen here. A little further on, you see a different scene. Merchants sit beside their goods waiting, not with urgency, but with a kind of patience that feels heavier than before. Fewer customers pass by, voices are softer, movement slower. The balance you felt in earlier cities has shifted. You might find yourself wondering how a place can appear stable on the surface, yet carry a different feeling underneath. As you continue, you begin to sense that authority here is present, but not evenly felt. Decisions seem to come from somewhere above, yet their effects do not reach every corner in the same way. You pass by a narrow alley where two individuals speak quietly, their voices low enough that only fragments reach you. There is mention of influence, of pressure from outside, of choices that are not entirely their own. The words are not clear enough to form a full picture, but the feeling remains. Something here is being shaped from beyond. You step back into a wider street where the last light of the evening touches the walls, casting long, soft shadows. The city feels suspended between calm and uncertainty, not fully one or the other. You notice a building that stands slightly apart from the rest, its entrance guarded, its presence more formal. People enter and leave, with careful movement, their expressions composed. Inside, conversations unfold that carry weight, decisions that will ripple outward into places far beyond this single city. And yet from where you stand, it remains quiet. The edges of this moment feel difficult to define. It is not a sudden change, not an obvious turning point. It is something slower, something that settles in gradually, almost unnoticed, until it's already past the fabric of daily life. You walk toward the outskirts, where the city begins to fade into open land again. A small group sits near a low wall sharing a simple meal. Their voices are calm, their movements familiar. In this space, life feels unchanged, steady, grounded in routine. It is a quiet reminder that even when larger forces shift, daily life continues in its own rhythm. You pause for a moment, listening to the soft sounds around you. The faint clink of utensils, the murmur of conversation, the distant call of an animal somewhere beyond the walls. It feels peaceful, and yet beneath that peace you can sense the unevenness you noticed earlier, the way influence moves through some parts of the world more strongly than others. You rise and continue along the path, leaving the city behind. The sky above is now deep and dark, the stars returning once more steady and unchanged. You take a slow breath, the cool night air settling around you. And as you walk, you begin to feel that the next phase of this journey will bring these quiet pressures into clearer focus. Not just as subtle shifts, but as something that will begin to shape the direction of the land itself. For now, though, the road remains calm, and you continue forward. You continue along the road as the night deepens, the sky, now rich with stars that seem almost close enough to touch. The air is cool and still, and the land stretches quietly in every direction. For a moment, everything feels unchanged again, steady, familiar, as though the small tensions you sensed earlier have softened with the darkness. But as you walk further, you begin to notice a different kind of activity. Faint lights appear ahead, not from homes or gathering places, but from a cluster of structures set slightly apart from any settlement. The glow is steady, purposeful, and as you draw closer, you hear a low rhythmic sound, not voices, not animals, but something mechanical. You approach slowly. The ground here feels disturbed, uneven, in a way that does not come from natural movement alone. Tools lie nearby, wooden frames, metal objects catching the faint light. People move with focused attention, their work continuing even into the night. You stand at a distance observing. Something is being taken from the earth. It is not immediately clear what it is, only that it matters. The effort involved, the careful handling, the quiet intensity of those working all suggest that this is not ordinary labour. Over time, this land will become known for something hidden beneath its surface. A resource that does not reveal itself at a glance, but once discovered begins to change how others look at this place, and you might not yet have a name for it as you stand here in the dim light, but you can sense its importance. The people working here do not move casually. Their actions are measured deliberate. Small containers are filled. Notes are taken. There is an awareness that what they are handling carries value, and with value comes attention. You step back slightly, allowing the scene to settle in your mind. The quiet land you have been walking through for so long is no longer just a place of history, culture, and identity. It is becoming something else as well. A source, a point of interest, a place that others begin to look toward, not just with curiosity, but with intention. You turn and continue walking, leaving the glow behind you. The darkness returns quickly, wrapping the land in its calm stillness once more. And yet the feeling has changed. You pass by a small group of travellers resting beside the road. Their conversation is soft, but you catch fragments of unfamiliar words, references to distant companies, agreements, permissions. The meaning is not fully clear, but it feels connected to what you just saw. Something is shifting again, not through belief, not through empire in the traditional sense, but through resources, through the value placed on what lies beneath the surface. You walk on the ground, steady beneath your feet, the stars unchanged above. In the distance, a larger settlement begins to come into view. Its lights are more numerous, its outline more defined. As you approach, you notice that the atmosphere here feels different from the cities you passed earlier. There is movement, but it is more directed. People gather in smaller groups, their conversations quieter, more focused. Doors close more quickly. Glances are exchanged with a subtle awareness. You move through the edge of the settlement, noticing how some buildings feel newly constructed, their material slightly different, their purpose not immediately clear. Inside one, you catch a glimpse of individuals seated around a table, papers spread before them. Their discussion is calm but deliberate, the kind of conversation that carries consequences beyond the room itself. The edges of this moment are difficult to define. It does not feel like a sudden turning point, but rather the beginning of something that will unfold, gradually gaining shape over time. You step back outside and continue along the path, the settlement fading behind you. The night air feels cooler now, almost quiet enough to hear your own breath. You might find yourself reflecting on how the story of this land has shifted once again, from tribes to empire, from empire to belief, from belief to identity, and now something new, value drawn from the earth itself. You take a slow breath, letting the stillness settle around you. And as you continue forward, you begin to sense that this new kind of attention, this focus on what lies beneath, will not remain distant or neutral. It will draw others closer, and with them new forms of influence. The road ahead remains calm, but it is leading into a world where decisions will no longer come only from within. You continue forward as the night stretches quietly around you, the road barely visible now, except for the faint outline it leaves across the land. The air feels cooler, carrying a stillness that seems to slow everything down, even your thoughts. The glow you left behind, the work in the ground, the quiet movements of people handling something unseen, it lingers in your mind, though the land itself has returned to silence. For a while, nothing changes. You walk through open space where the only sounds are your steps and the soft movement of wind across dry grass. The stars remain steady above, untouched by anything happening below. And then gradually you begin to notice something different again. Not in the land, in the people. As you approach the next settlement, the atmosphere feels more careful. Not tense, not unsettled, but aware in a way that is difficult to describe. You pass through the outer edge slowly. Conversations are quieter here, not absent but measured. People speak in lower tones as though their words carry further than before. A glance lingers a little longer. A pause stretches just slightly. Nothing is obvious, and yet everything feels just a little more deliberate. You walk along a narrow street where doors are partially open, light spilling softly into the night. Inside one, you see a small group gathered around a table, their heads close together, their voices barely audible. You cannot hear what they are saying, but you can feel the weight of it. You continue walking. Further in the streets widens slightly, and you notice something else. Presence. Not in a visible form, not as a force, but as a kind of influence that sits quietly in the background. Something shaping decisions without announcing itself. A man stands at the edge of the street watching as others pass. His expression is calm but attentive. He seems to be listening not to any one conversation but to the tone of the place itself. You move past him, continuing deeper into the settlement. The buildings here feel more recently adjusted, small changes in structure and layout, in purpose. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would catch your attention at first glance. But as you walk, the pattern becomes clearer. Things are being arranged, not hurriedly, not openly, but carefully. You might find yourself wondering how influence works when it is not visible, when it does not arrive with force but settles in slowly shaping choices from within. You step into a quieter courtyard where the sounds of the street fade into a soft background hum. A single lamp burns near the setteras, light, steady, casting gentle shadows along the walls. A few individuals sit apart from one another, not speaking but present, waiting perhaps, or listening. The air feels still here, almost held in place. You remain for a moment, letting the quiet settle around you. And then you begin to notice something small. Movement not outward, but inward. People adjusting how they speak, how they gather, how they move through space. Not because something has forced them to, but because something has changed. You step back out into the street and continue walking. The night feels deeper now, the silence more complete. Behind you, the settlement continues, its quiet rhythm unchanged on the surface, yet subtly altered, in ways that are not immediately visible. Ahead, the road stretches on, and as you follow it, you begin to sense that the influence you have been feeling is not limited to this one place. It is spreading, not quickly, not loudly, but steadily, like a current moving beneath still water. You take a slow breath, the cool air settling into your chest. And as you continue forward, you feel that this quiet shaping of the world, this unseen presence guiding decisions and direction, will soon become clearer, more defined, more difficult to ignore. For now, though, it remains just beneath the surface, and the night stays calm. You continue along the road as the night slowly begins to loosen its hold, the sky shifting almost imperceptibly toward morning. The stars fade one by one, not disappearing all at once, but dimming gently until only a few remain. The air carries that quiet moment between darkness and light where everything feels suspended. The land ahead begins to take on clearer shape again. Low buildings rise in the distance, their outlines sharper now as the first light touches them. The settlement you approach feels more structured than the last. Not in the calm, balanced way you once experienced, but in a more deliberate, almost corrective way. As you enter, you notice something immediately. Change is no longer hidden. It's visible, though still quiet. The streets are straighter, more defined. The buildings show signs of recent construction or adjustment. Some older structures remain, but they stand beside newer ones that carry a different sense of order. You walk slowly, taking it in. People move with purpose here. Not hurried, not anxious, but directed. Their actions feel guided, as though they are following a path that has been set more clearly than before. You pass a wide avenue where a few figures stand observing the flow of movement. Their posture is calm, but there is a sense of oversight in the way they watch. Not intrusive, but present. You continue forward. A large building stands ahead its entrance, open, its interior filled with quiet activity. Inside, individuals move between tables, carrying papers, speaking in low-focused tones. Decisions are being shaped here, though the exact nature of them remains just out of reach. You pause briefly at the entrance. The space feels organized, intentional. Not chaotic, not uncertain, but controlled in a way that suggests a new direction is being established. You step back outside and continue walking. The light grows stronger now, revealing more detail in the surroundings. The city feels awake, but not in the gentle way you experienced before. There is a sense of alignment here, of effort being directed toward a specific goal. You might begin to sense that this is a moment of transformation, not driven by slow blending, but by deliberate change. The land you've been walking through for so long is being reshaped, not erased, but reorganized. You pass a group of workers adjusting a section of the road, their movements steady and coordinated. Nearby, another group focuses on a building, reinforcing its structure, refining its shape. There is a quiet determination in these actions, a feeling that something is being built with intention. You continue along the main street, noticing how older patterns of life remain, but now exist within a more defined framework. Shops are open, conversations continue, but there is a clearer sense of direction in how everything fits together. You step into a smaller side street where the atmosphere softens slightly. A few individuals sit outside their homes, speaking quietly, their movements slower, less structured. Here the earlier rhythms still linger, and you might find yourself reflecting on how change rarely replaces everything at once. It settles in layers, reshaping some areas more quickly than others. You walk toward the edge of the settlement where the buildings give way to open land again. The morning light now spreads fully across the horizon, warm and steady. You pause for a moment, looking back. The city stands behind you, balanced between past and future. Its structure more defined, its direction clearer, yet still carrying traces of everything that came before. You take a slow breath. The air feels different now, more certain, more intentional, and as you turn forward again, continuing along the road, you sense that this period of deliberate change will carry the land into a new kind of identity, one that feels modern in its shape yet deeply connected to its past. The path ahead stretches into the growing light, and you continue. You continue walking as the morning light grows clearer, the sky now soft and pale above you. The air feels different here, less quiet than before, though still calm. There is a subtle hum in the distance, something steady, unfamiliar, yet not overwhelming. As you follow the road, the land begins to change again. The open stretches you have grown used to slowly give way to a more structured landscape. Buildings rise in the greatest number, their shapes more uniform, their materials more varied. Some are older, carrying the weight of time. Others feel newer, sharper at the edges, their presence more recent. You move forward slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the details. There are lines now, not drawn on the ground in a visible way, but present in how the space is arranged. Roads connect more directly. Areas feel divided with intention. Movement follows clearer paths and oars. You pass by a wide street where a group of people stand watching something you cannot yet see. Their posture is calm but attentive. You follow their gaze. A vehicle moves along the road, not pulled by animals, not guided by the slow rhythm you have known. It moves steadily on its own, carrying a small group inside. The sound is low, continuous, unlike anything you have heard before in this journey. You pause, and in that moment you feel the distance between the world you began in and the one you are stepping into now. Time has shifted, not suddenly, not all at once, but steadily, bringing with it new forms, new tools, new ways of moving through the world. You continue walking. The city around you feels more defined than any before it. Its structure is clear, its movement organized in ways that feel almost familiar even if the details are new. You pass by a building with wide windows. Inside, people sit at tables, their focus directed towards small objects placed before them. Papers, tools, instruments. Their attention is precise, their movements controlled. There is a different kind of work happening here. Less physical, more measured. You step back into the street, noticing how the flow of people follows patterns that feel more structured than before. There is still calm, but it is a different kind of calm shaped by systems that guide behavior more closely. You might find yourself reflecting on how identity begins to shift in a world like this. Not only shaped by traditional belief, but by change itself, by the need to adapt, to organize, to move forward. You walk toward a quieter area where older buildings still stand. Their surfaces are worn, their shapes more familiar. They sit beside newer structures, creating a contrast that feels almost like two different moments in time resting side by side. You place your hand briefly against one of the older walls. It feels solid, steady, unchanged in a way that feels comforting, and yet around it everything continues to evolve. You continue along the path as the day grows brighter. In the distance you notice a flag moving gently in the air. Its design is unfamiliar in this moment, though it carries a sense of identity, of definition. This is a time when the land you have been walking through is formally taking on a name that will carry forward into the modern world. Iran. The word settles quietly, not as a break from the past, but as a continuation of it, shaped by centuries of transformation. You move through the streets, noticing how people carry themselves with a sense of belonging, even as the world around them continues to change. There is a balance here, between what has been and what is becoming. You pass by a group standing in conversation, their voices calm but focused. Their words carry a sense of direction, of intention toward the future. You cannot hear everything, but you can feel the shift. This is no longer a world defined only by what came before. It is a world shaping what comes next. You step beyond the city, returning once more to the open road. The light is strong now, the sky clear. You take a slow breath, and as you continue forward, you sense that this new identity, this modern form taking shape, will soon meet forces beyond itself. Forces that will not remain distant, but will step closer into the story. You continue along the road as the day settles into a steady brightness, the sky clear above you, the air warm but not overwhelming. The land feels more connected now, threaded with movement shaped by decisions that stretch beyond what you can immediately see. The quiet openness of earlier moments has shifted into something more layered. You walk towards another settlement, one that feels active in a different way. Not louder, not more crowded, but more aware. There is a sense that this place is not only living its own life, but responding to something larger. As you move through the streets, you begin to notice the signs. Buildings that carry a certain formality. Rooms where discussions seem to linger longer than usual. Papers exchanged with care, voices lowered not out of secretiveness but out of focus. There is a feeling here of alignment with something beyond the horizon. You continue walking, letting the details reveal themselves slowly. A group gathers near a shaded area, their posture calm but attentive. They speak of distant events, of movements taking place far beyond this land, yet somehow connected to it. You catch fragments. Names of places you have not walked through. References to powers that exist far away, yet feel present here in subtle ways. You might not fully understand it in this moment, but you can sense that the world has become smaller, not in distance, but in influence. You step into a quieter street where the sounds of the city soften again. A single figure stands near a doorway watching the flow of people with quiet attention. There is no tension in his expression, only awareness. You pass him and continue. Inside a nearby building, you glimpse a room where individuals sit around a table. Their conversation is calm but carries weight. The kind of weight that shapes outcomes beyond the room itself. You do not hear their words, but you feel their direction. The edges of this moment feel layered, not fully clear. Clear, not fully hidden. Just enough to sense that something important is unfolding. You step back into the open air, the light steady, the world continuing as it always does on the surface. People move through their routines. Market remain active. Conversations rise and fall, and yet beneath it all there is a quiet pull. A sense that this land is being drawn into something larger, something that connects distant places in ways that were not possible before. You walk toward the edge of the settlement and pause. From here, the land stretches outward again, but it no longer feels isolated. Even in its openness, it feels connected, as though unseen lines extend across it, linking it to places far beyond your view. You might find yourself reflecting on how the world changes when influence begins to move across distance so easily, when decisions made far away begin to shape life here, when local paths intersect with global ones. You take a slow breath, the air warm and still, and as you stand there you begin to sense that this connection, this growing involvement of distant powers is not neutral. It carries direction, it carries intention. You turn and continue walking. The road ahead feels familiar yet different. And as you move forward, you begin to feel that the next moments in this journey will bring that distant influence into clearer form, not just as presence, but as action. You continue walking as the light softens again, the day beginning its slow descent toward evening. The sky shifts into warmer tones and the air carries a quiet heaviness, not uncomfortable but full, as though something is about to settle into place. The road beneath your feet feels more familiar now, and yet the world around you continues to change in ways that are harder to ignore. As you approach the next part of the city, the atmosphere shifts, not dramatically, but clearly. Groups gather more closely together. Conversations feel more focused. Movement slows in certain places as though people are paying attention to something that is not immediately visible. You walk into a wide street where a number of people stand, not in chaos, not in urgency, but in presence. They are watching, listening, waiting. There is a sense that something long building has reached a point where it can no longer remain beneath the surface. You move slowly through the space, feeling the subtle tension in the air. It is not loud, not chaotic, but it is unmistakable. You pass by a group speaking in low voices. Their words carry weight, shaped by conviction, by memory, by something deeply felt. You do not hear everything, but you sense the direction. Change, not the gradual kind you have walked through before, something more immediate, more visible. You continue forward, noticing how the city itself seems to respond. Shops remain open, but their activity is quieter. Doors close more quickly. People move with awareness, as though each action matters more than it did before. You step into a narrower street where the sounds of the crowd fade slightly, replaced by a softer, more contained stillness. Here individuals stand in small groups, speaking with intention. Their posture is steady, their expressions calm yet focused. It does not feel like disorder. It feels like something being expressed, something that has been forming over time now coming into view. You might find yourself reflecting on how moments like this do not appear suddenly. They build quietly, through years, through experiences, through the slow gathering of thought and feeling. And when they emerge, they carry the weight of everything that came before. You walk toward an open square where the light now casts long shadows across the ground. More people are here, still calm, still composed, but present in a way that feels unified. There is no single voice, no single direction, and yet there is a shared sense of purpose. You pause at the edge of the square. The air feels still, the sounds are soft, and yet everything feels significant. You look around and notice something small. Older elements of the city remain. The walls, the pathways, the structures that have stood through so many changes. They are still here, but now they frame a different moment. A moment where the past and present meet directly. You take a slow breath. And in that breath, you begin to feel how the long story you have been walking through, from early tribes to empires to belief to identity, has led here. Not to an end, but to a transformation. You step back from the square and continue along the path. The sun lowers further, the light fading into softer tones. Behind you, the city remains active, though quieter now, as if holding on to the moment, allowing it to settle. Ahead, the road stretches forward once more. You walk slowly, calmly, and you begin to sense that what is unfolding here will shape not only this place, but how it is seen by the wider world, how it is understood, how it is remembered. The air cools slightly as evening returns. The sky deepens, and you continue forward. You continue walking as the evening settles fully into night, the sky deep and calm above you. The last light fades gently from the horizon, leaving only the quiet presence of stars, steady and unchanged, just as they were when your journey began. The road beneath your feet feels familiar now, not because it has stayed the same, but because you have walked through so many versions of it. Through open plains and early settlements, through cities shaped by empire, through quiet gatherings of belief, through places where identity formed slowly, layer by layer. And now, as you move forward, the world around you feels both new and deeply rooted at the same time. You reach a quiet rise in the land and pause. From here, you can see the outline of the city in the distance, its light soft and scattered, its movement gentle. It no longer feels like a single place, but like a collection of moments all resting together. You take a slow breath. The air is cool, still, and in that stillness you begin to feel the full weight of the journey. Everything you have seen has not disappeared. It has settled. The early tribes moving carefully across the land. The formation of empire built through connection and structure. The blending of cultures quiet and gradual. The shaping of belief carried through conversation and reflection. The rise of identity defined and redefined across time. The presence of influence moving in from beyond. The moments of change, both soft and visible. All of it remains, not as separate pieces, but as something continuous. You begin to understand that what exists here now is not the result of a single moment or even a single era. It's the result of accumulation, of memory, of persistence. You walk a little further, the ground steady beneath your feet, and you begin to sense how these layers extend into the present in ways that are not always immediately visible. The tensions that exist today, the relationships between nations, the careful balance between independence and influence, they do not begin in isolation. They grow from everything that came before, from the long history of a connection and distinction, from the ways this land has learned to hold its identity while adapting to change, From the moments where outside attention shifted into involvement, from the points where belief and governance became closely tied, you might find yourself reflecting on how the present is often just the surface of a much deeper story. A story that does not announce itself loudly but reveals itself slowly if you are willing to walk through it. You continue along the path, the night fully settled now. The city behind you grows quieter, its lights dimming slightly, its movement slowing. The land around you returns to stillness, and in that stillness there is a kind of peace. Not because everything is resolved, but because everything is understood as part of a larger flow. You pause one last time. The stars above remain unchanged, the same sky that watched the first small gatherings of people, the same sky that saw empires rise and shift, the same sky that now rests above a world still shaping itself. You take a slow breath, and as you exhale you feel the journey begin to soften. The details blur slightly. The edges of places and moments fade gently into one another. The road once so clear beneath your feet becomes less defined. Not gone, just quieter, more distant, and you allow yourself to rest in that feeling, to let the long path you have walked settle into something calm and steady within you. The story does not end, it simply becomes still. Now as the night deepens and everything grows quieter, you can imagine the land resting once more under the same wide sky, its history layered gently beneath the surface, its presence steady and enduring. The distant city lights fade into a soft glow, and the sounds of the world slow until they almost disappear. You are no longer walking. You are simply there, breathing, resting. The cool air moves softly around you, carrying no urgency, no demand. The ground feels stable beneath you, the sky vast and calm above. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to reach. Only stillness, only quiet. And as your awareness softens, as the details of the journey drift further into the background, you can allow everything to fade gently like the last light at the edge of the horizon. The night holds everything in place. Calm, steady, at rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.